Chapter 61. There's a method to make you all become strong. You, come over here. With the trembling slaves watching, Hushi ordered Shijia to walk over, then took his pulse. The price to buy these slaves was extremely cheap due to the fact that they were thought to have practically no innate cultivation talent. However, after Hushi took their pulse, she discovered that their physiques were extremely outstanding. If they were a part of the organization in her previous life, they would have become outstanding soldiers trained to sacrifice their lives if the need arose. For them to be able to handle a martial artist of the chi refining stage would be as easy as rubbing their hands together. Hushi's odd movements combined with her cold expression made the slaves' hearts become terrified. Finally, Shijia was unable to bear it, and with a trembling voice said, "Master, we have plenty of strength. We're willing to work hard for you, pledge our life, and vow our loyalty to you. Please, Master, don't make us into medicine bodies." A so-called medicine body and pig meat actually had the same concept, but a medicine body didn't have any cultivation base, so their ending was even more miserable than that of pig meat. Hushi knew their hearts were apprehensive, so without beating around the bush simply said, "I know that all of your innate cultivation talent is no good, but I have a method that will make you all become strong. It's just that the process will be somewhat painful, so if any of you are unwilling, then you'd better mention it now. As for becoming medicine bodies, you can rest assured, I'm completely uninterested in that sort of thing." After hearing this, Shijia and the others were shocked yet happy. When they realized that Hushi wouldn't deceive them while being in charge of their lives and deaths, pleasantly surprised tears suddenly started dripping down their cheeks. No one could understand how truly desperate and low they were. They were abandoned by their own families, then abandoned by society, left to wait in a cage for someone to pick them. Unfortunately, they were born into this martial artist world with a lack of innate talent, where the weak were prey to the strong. From the moment they became slaves, they never thought that they would have a chance to start a new life. As long as they can become strong, let alone bear a little suffering, they would be more than willing to climb a mountain of knives and cross a sea of flames. Shijia kneeled down, kowtowing with tearful eyes, "Master, I'm willing. As long as I have the chance to become strong, even if I die, I'm willing." Soon, the other 9 slaves were kneeling and kowtowing too, many of them bursting into tears. Some of them even shouted "Long live" 3 times to Hushi. However, while Hushi's expression didn't change, her voice became colder. "I'll give you all a training plan in several days. The Tsang Mountain behind this courtyard will be your training location. Shijia, as the person in charge, every half a month I will come to check your progress. If someone dares to work half-heartedly, none of you will want to know the results. I'll give all of you a choice. If you want to abandon this chance, you can raise your hand now. Once started, I absolutely will not allow anyone to quit halfway. Do you all understand clearly?" "Yes, Master." The slaves kowtowed as they answered, their faces firm and resolute, none of them having the slightest intention of withdrawing. After dispatching the slaves, Hushi rejected wet nurse Chin's offer to bring her dinner, only saying that she had already eaten when she was out earlier. Then she entered her space. Once she entered her space, Hushi relaxed as she breathed in the strong spiritual energy, making the exhaustion in her entire body disappear without a trace. Mother, you've finally come. Dandan missed you. Did you quickly come to see if Dandan is doing all right?" Dandan's eager and happy shouts reached her ears. Hushi laughed while entering Shimi Palace, gently placing a hand on Dandan. "Is the stuff I gave you this afternoon delicious?" What Hushi was referring to are the leftover dishes for Dandan that she packed when she was at the intoxicated immortal earlier. Chapter 62. Forefinger movement. The golden light on Dandan's body bounced as he cheerfully said, "Tasty, tasty, but I'm not full at all. Mother, Dandan still wants more." Hushi unhappily responded, "You want to eat until you're full? You, this big stomach king, how can I not go bankrupt? Not to mention, what about me? I'm so hungry that my chest is sticking to my back. You go aside to play." Finished speaking, Hushi no longer paid attention to Dandan's protests. In the palace hall, she set up a simple kitchen table, taking out all the food ingredients and medicinal herbs that she bought on the streets from the storage ring. From Dandan's explanation, Hashi knew that Shumi Palace's rooms possessed unlimited storage space and hidden spiritual benefits. As long as the food ingredients are stored in Shumi Palace, they absolutely wouldn't leak any spiritual energy, and the food ingredients would be able to stay fresh forever. Dandan curiously watched the busy Hashi, from time to time asking all sorts of questions. Mother, can Dandan eat these herbs? They are so fragrant. Dandan feels hungry, Mother. What is a kitchen table? Can it be eaten? Mother is very awesome. Why can the spiritual plants turn into strange things in Mother's hands? Hashi felt a headache start because of this little guy's noise, yet she was unable to find a way to stop it. At this time, what she was doing was not mixing medicines. Rather, she was using a mix of this world's spiritual and ordinary plants to make seasonings. In her previous life, Hashi had had a powerful innate talent. As long as she understood the nature of a plant, she could calculate all the best uses for it in her mind, producing all types of medicines with different effects and smells. All the plant's characteristics, phases, and complementary effects were stored in her mind. So if she wanted to use a certain plant, she would easily be able to know all about it. Hashi's speed was very fast. In about the time it took to burn an incense stick, all kinds of bottles and jars were spread out in front of her. These bottles and jars gave off the slight smells of vinegar, sugar, and pepper. So in short, in her hands, spiritual plants were capable of matching real seasonings. A thread of golden spiritual energy drifted onto one of the pepper bottles, secretly stretching to reach inside a little, then stretching again, this time a little more. Achoo! Achoo! Dandan continuously sneezed, its voice full of grievance and bewilderment, crying, Mother, what is this? It's so hard to eat. Dandan don't like it. Hashi laughed. Okay, if you don't like it, then when I'm finished, you're not allowed to eat any. Finished speaking, she grabbed a spiritual wind rabbit that was already dead, and with fast, nimble movements, she peeled the skin and bones, then placed it on a simple grill and began to roast it. Shumi Palace is the best place to cook because, if she didn't want any smoke or garbage, she only has to think about it and it will disappear without a trace, including the bloodstains on her hands that were left after slaughtering the spiritual wind rabbit. Following Hashi's movements, the wind spirit rabbit rotated without stopping, the bloody white meat slowly turning an alluring golden yellow. As the fat from the rabbit dripped down into the fire, a zzz sound could be heard. A variety of seasonings were brushed onto the golden yellow wind spirit rabbit, and when Hashi no longer had to erase the smoke, a delicious fragrance that made a person's finger move permeated the air in the room. The smell is so good. Mother, what is that? Dandan wants to eat that. Hashi laughed. Didn't you say that you don't like it? Since you don't like it, you don't get to eat it. Woo-woo, Mother. Dandan was wrong. Dandan likes it, wants to eat it, wants to eat it. Dandan begged and praised her, and with a miserable and eager expression said, Mother is the most awesome mother in the world. Dandan has never smelled such a fragrant smell. Mother, give Dandan a little to taste. Chapter 63. Unexpected guest. Hashi was amused at Dandan's miserable and cute tone. So tearing off a rabbit leg, she brought it to her lips and ate a mouthful. Sure enough, the fragrance permeated throughout the meat, while it was tasty and tender. This is the taste fine food should really have. Hashi sighed, then said to Dandan, who was waiting impatiently, I'll give you the rest, so eat it, little glutton. Wow, Mother is the best. Dandan's golden light bounced incessantly a moment before it pounced towards the already well-roasted wind spirit rabbit. Even the hot flames didn't remain, as all it took was the blink of an eye, and the remaining rabbit was completely swallowed. Dandan savored eating the roasted wind spirit rabbit, and having tasted it once, he longed to taste it again, pestering Hashi to make another for it to eat. Hashi tried her best to convince Dandan, using all sorts of means to promise that the next time she came, she would make even more delicious foods for Dandan. Only then was she able to get away from this little guy and leave her space. Although her space had the ability to cleanse spiritual power, Hashi still felt tired from rushing around all day. She let people prepare hot water for a bath, threw off her clothes, and when she felt the warm, soft and smooth hot water across her skin, she couldn't help but heave a long, relaxed sigh. Suddenly, Hushy's brows wrinkled, her heart faintly flashing a trace of intangible impatience. This feeling is similar to what she experienced when Qinglong was following her, unable to state the feeling clearly, yet making her restless and aware. Someone is secretly approaching this room. Hushy's heart shivered, and knowing that she had no time to put on clothes, nor wrap her chest to cover her body, she promptly made the decision to take out a fake human skin mask, quickly wearing it on her face. In the blink of an eye, her originally exquisite snow-white skin now became sallow. Her delicate and elegant facial features also became dark and swollen, making her look unsightly, completely restoring the original Nalan Hushy's appearance. Barely finished with her disguise, Hushy sensed the stranger's aura in the room. A pair of eyes secretly stared at her in the dark, that cold gaze filled with a hint of measurement. Which friend would ever visit in the dark of night? Sneaky and hidden in the corner, is it not shameful? Hushy's coldly mocking words were barely finished when a figure suddenly appeared in the shadow of candlelight. It revealed a woman dressed in red, her complexion beautiful and alluring, yet as cold as ice. Her eyes exposed her contempt as they landed on Hushy's body, her face set in an expression of examination. "Who do you think you are? How dare you speak to me like that?" The woman's voice was pleasant to hear, however. The words that came out from her mouth were extremely arrogant and filled with loathing. Even more, as she stared at Hushy, it was like she was looking at a pile of powerless trash. Her eyes roamed Hushy's face, then lowered to land on her petite body that was mostly obscured by the water, where bruises and scars were still visible. The ridicule in the woman's eyes became more pronounced. "As it turns out, it's just a shriveled little girl, humph." Hushy sneered. Stretching out her hands, she placed them on the edge of the tub, indifferently saying, "I am a little girl, so of course I can't be compared with you, this beautiful and flirtatious aunt. But what's your business, visiting this late at night?" The expression on the woman's face suddenly turned dark, her eyes emitting flames. She glared at Hushy as if she wanted to dismember her body into 1,000 pieces. She was only 20 years old, but this smelly girl actually dared to call her aunt. Even comparing her to a prostitute, she was simply asking for death. "You court death?" A sharp blade flashed in the red-dressed woman's eyes, her body issuing an overwhelming power pressure. Hushy felt a huge amount of pressure on her body, like her chest was slowly being covered with the weight of 1,000 gold coins, the blood throughout her body flaring and violently surging up. Her complexion suddenly turned pale, and leaning forward, she vomited a mouthful of blood with a wah sound. When the red-dressed woman saw Hushy's pitiful appearance, her eyes quickly regained their previous coldness and contempt, and she sneeringly said, "Sure enough, you're just trash without a drop of spiritual power. As trash you should be more self-aware." Chapter 64. Zhu Ke. The woman's words were not yet finished, when suddenly, her expression changed, her eyes revealing her shock. Unaware of when, she had already lost sight of the little girl's figure in the wooden tub before her. Yet, just as she was about to search the spacious room, she sensed a power pressure that made her shudder. However, her shock only lasted a moment, and quickly calming down, a laugh filled with contempt left her mouth. "She's a gold core stage martial artist, a great 5th-rank doctor. For an insignificant ordinary person to try to harm her, they must be dreaming." Then, just as the spiritual power in her body started to circulate, cold to the bone icy invisible needles fiercely shot towards her. The woman's face showed the hint of a sneer, and suddenly, her spiritual power burst out. In a flash, those invisible needles melted and disappeared. The next moment, she once again released the pressure of her spiritual power, and following that, a groan was heard from a corner of the room. Hushy's figure was slowly revealed. Wearing a white nightdress with a pale complexion, a trickle of blood flowed from the corner of her mouth. That woman saw Hushy's sorry figure and miserable countenance, and the smile on her face increased. "An insignificant person like you wanted to injure me, you're simply overestimating your capabilities." At this time, Hushy's meridians were extremely painful. Even more, her chest felt like it was burning. However, her eyes exposed a cold smile in their depth instead. "Oh, is that how it is? Just because you say I'm unable to injure you, then I'm unable to injure you?" Hushy had barely finished speaking when the woman's mien suddenly changed. Reaching up, she touched her left cheek, feeling a dampness spread at the touch of her fingertips. She could feel a scorching pain on the skin of her face. "You've dared to injure my face. You're asking for death." The woman's heart was shocked and angry, her face showing a frantic expression. Rapidly gathering the spiritual power in her palm, she ruthlessly aimed a strike towards Hushy. Hushy's internal energy also rapidly gathered, and although the strength of woman before her eyes was much greater than her own, it didn't mean she would be easily captured. Even though she was injured, she must make the other party pay the same price. Then, in a moment just before the woman attacked, her gaze discovered something on Hushy's body. Suddenly, her expression changed. The spiritual power that was already released abruptly returned, but due to the backlash of pressure, the woman staggered back several steps. Leaning against the wall and standing with difficulty, her face was filled with disbelief. Hushy was also somewhat perplexed by this event, confused as to why the woman had suddenly retreated, her manner like one who had seen a ghost. The woman dressed in red shakily stood, blankly taking several deep breaths, before asking in a trembling voice, How can Master leave his imprint on a person like you?" Hushy felt the woman's gaze focus on the top of her head, and her heart started pounding. Quickly, she removed the jade hairpin from her hair, her eyes flashing coldly. "So, it was Nangongyu that sent you here?" The woman's face was filled with bewilderment. Her eyes looked at Hushy with ruthlessness and jealousy. However, she had no choice but to restrain the killing intention within her heart. She was called Zhu Kei, one of Hell King's personal bodyguards. She was responsible for looking after Hell King's health while refining pills and medicines. Today, her master had gone out and returned home very late. Without even waiting for her to pay her respects to him as her master, Qing Long had said that master ordered for her to come to this desolate countryside by herself to treat this girl's scars, even ordering her to take along the precious jade muscle pill. With a sullen and resentful heart, Zhu Kei had arrived at this remote courtyard. However, who would have thought that what she saw was this little girl with a common appearance and trash without the slightest trace of spiritual power? No matter what she thought, Zhu Kei, just couldn't understand. Master had never placed any woman in his sights before, so how come he had ordered her to travel from a distant place to rush over to this remote area, only to treat this little girl's scars? Chapter 65. You like Nangongyu. She had originally wanted to teach this little girl a lesson, make her suffer a bit, and then warn her to stay away from Master. However, she unexpectedly saw Master's spiritual power imprint on her body. Darn! How can Master treat such a girl favorably? Who does she think she is? At this moment, Zhu Kei was itching to dismember this shameless girl's body that dared to seduce her master into 1,000 pieces. However, the master's imprint can be said to be his warning and protection, so if, just a moment ago, her palms really had struck that girl, Master would have certainly known. And no one wanted to know what kind of terrible punishment Master would give. Zhu Kei took a deep breath, slowly restoring her tranquil appearance, and unhurriedly said, Zhu Kei came to offer a gift on behalf of Master to heal young Mississippi. Zhu Kei won? Qing Long? As expected of Nangongyu's people, the coldness in Hushy's heart intensified, but even so, her face remained indifferent. "Oh, then your healing skill must be really extraordinary. Just a moment ago, didn't that palm of yours want to kill me? Could it be that Dr. Zhu Kei has the ability to revive the dead, helping you find a way out of an impasse? Otherwise, what explanation would you give to your master if you killed me?" Hushy's eyes narrowed slightly in silence when Zhu Kei coldly replied, "I'll warn you now, don't even think about telling Master about today's matter. I've been accompanying Master since I was a child. You're just a stranger close to Master by chance. He at most only sees you as a pet he can tease. You tell me, if you tell him, will he believe you or me? Even if I had lost control and accidentally killed you before, do you really think Master would punish me for an insignificant person like you? Finished speaking, she took out a porcelain bottle and threw it to Hushi, warning in a cold voice, remember, stay away from my master. Master is not someone an ant like you can covet. Hushi's cold eyes looked at her contemptuously, and with a disgusted expression, the tip of her brows suddenly raised. With a slight smirk she said, you like Nangongyu, right? Zhu Kei's face turned white, her voice suddenly shrill. You talk nonsense. Oh, I hit the mark. Hushi leisurely said, I wonder though, does your master know the thoughts you have towards him? You shut up. If you dare babble nonsense again, whether you believe me or not, you'll what? You'll kill me to silence me? That depends on whether you have that ability. Hushi sneered, and with a cold tone, sharply said, I'll also warn you, don't come and provoke me again. I have nothing to do with Nangongyu. I'm too lazy to care what thoughts you have towards Nangongyu. But if you threaten me again, then don't blame me if I find your master to tell him about your secret. Now, you can get lost. At the moment Hushi said get lost, her body released a sudden power pressure that could make people tremble. This wasn't a top-ranked suppression technique. It was like the automatic imposing manner a person in a high position of power developed with experience. Zhu Kei was so intimidated her complexion whitened, her feet subconsciously retreating a step. Once she realized what she was doing, her body immediately started to shake in anger. She was scared of this ordinary person. This woman should simply die a million times. 1. Zhu Kei's name means vermilion bird. In previous chapters, Qinglong was introduced. His name means azure dragon. In Chinese culture, the azure dragon and the vermilion bird are part of the 4 mythological creatures, with each beast representing a cardinal direction, a season, and an element. The other 2 mythological creatures are white tiger and black tortoise. Chapter 66. Scars remain for a lifetime. Zhu Kei's heart was filled with hate, but remembering her master's imprint, she only glanced at Hushi with gloomy and cold eyes, before flinging her sleeves and leaving. It wasn't until Zhu Kei's figure and scent had completely disappeared from the room that Hushi finally couldn't bear it any longer, vomiting out a mouthful of blood. Her already pale face lost even more color, becoming paler. She hadn't expected that a martial artist of gold core stage only needed to casually move their hands, and they would be able to injure her to such a degree. She really was too weak. Hushi endured the pain all over her body and entered her space. The existence of her space in the real world was like a mirror. It's the reason why when she eats in her space, she wouldn't be hungry in reality. Therefore, when her consciousness entered her space, she was still wearing a thin, blood-stained nightdress, her complexion unsightly due to the heavy injury. The rich spiritual energy in her space fused into her body, soothing the pain Hushi felt, helping her to relax a lot. Although Dandan was in the Shumi Palace, it was still able to know all that happened in the space. So when Hushi returned injured, it suddenly started crying loudly, Mother, are you in pain? Does it hurt? Dandan is useless. I can't do anything to help Mother. Hushi's face held a helpless expression, yet her heart was somewhat touched. Good Dandan. Wait until you can come out, then you can help Mother. When Dandan comes out, I will help Mother beat that bad person. Whoever dares to bully Mother, Dandan will make him humiliated. Its soft and immature child voice was full of anger and hatred. So much so, that Hushi was able to imagine a child with its small fists tightly clenched and pouting cheeks, swearing an oath with an adorably angry appearance. The depressed feeling in her heart suddenly lessened. She arrived at the edge of the 9th secluded spirit spring, drinking some of the spring water. The burning pain in her meridians disappeared in a flash, like cooling water across a burn, making her sigh in comfort. When she recalled that Zhu Kei had looked at her with disgust, as if she had been watching an ant, on top of her insulting words and actions, it made Hushi's eyes glint with a sharp trace of killing intent. Zhu Kei, was it? Very good. This debt, I will remember this. Inevitably, there will be a day where I will pay it back. As for that small wound on Zhu Kei's face, Hushi sneered while touching her own cheek. that can remain as her having received an advanced payment. In Zhukei's eyes, she was nothing but an ordinary person. Her face having received such a small wound was already enough to insult her, so she simply didn't care about it. However, what Zhukei didn't know was that Hushi was known as by Wuchang 1, the double poisonous doctor. In her previous life, her opponents had been afraid to come within 10 meters of her, and that is because anytime, anywhere, there would always be extremely poisonous and incurable poisons in her hands. And Zhukei, if she discovered that the scars were unusual earlier, perhaps there would still be time to use spiritual power to tend to the poison. But if it's too late, she should be prepared to live with the scars for a lifetime. Although she was already very tired, Hushi still took out the spiritual plants she had bought today, proceeding to concoct all kinds of poisons. There was anesthesia, blood-sealing throat poison, and a large assortment of poisons that could either injure or kill a person. There were also poisons that could cause a person to be in so much pain, they would want to die. The confrontation with Zhukei had made Hushi profoundly understand that in this world, it was those with power that had the upper hand. Before she was able to remove the seal on her dantian, she must have strategies in place to defend herself. Suddenly, in her mind, there flashed an image of Nangong Yu's handsome and outstanding appearance, his eyes luminous as they gazed towards her. Hushi narrowed her eyes, quickly dispersing this visual from her mind. Once all the poisons were concocted properly, Hushi released a relieved breath. Just as she was about to exit her space, she suddenly touched the bottle of medicine in the pocket of her nightdress. Opening the bottle's lid, a strong and pure medicinal fragrance permeated the air. What Zhukei had said was right. This is indeed a good medicine. At one, Hei Wuchang always bring disaster, while by Wuchang, although also scary and feared, is believed to sometimes bring wealth too. Wuchang means changeable and unpredictable. Understandably, it would be terrible to have to deal with someone or something that's devoid of constancy and reliability. The Heibai Wuchang, literally black and white impermanence, are two deities in Chinese folk religion in charge of escorting the spirits of the dead to the underworld. As their names suggest, they are dressed in black and white respectively. They are the subordinates of Yama, the ruler of the underworld in Chinese mythology, alongside the ox-headed and horse-faced hellguards. They are worshipped as fortune deities in Chinese temples in some countries. In some instances, the Heibai Wuchang are represented as a single being instead of two separate beings, known as the Wuchang Gui, literally ghost of impermanence. Depending on the person it encounters, the Wuchang Gui can appear as either a fortune deity who rewards the person for doing good deeds, or a malevolent deity who punishes the person for committing evil. Chapter 67. The legendary Hell King. Hushi smelled it and disdainfully curled her lips, throwing the bottle towards Shumi Palace. So arrogant, and yet it's only a second-rate medicine. The quality not even achieving complete fusion. Dan, I'll give this to you to eat. Dan happily swallowed the medicine, shouting frankly that it still wanted more. This little guy, from head to tail and from top to bottom, really is an eater. Wanting to eat the sword and spirit tools, spiritual plants and magic pills, it also wants to eat properly cooked food. It eats so much, yet why doesn't it show even the tiniest sign that its shell will crack? Does it want to make her bankrupt? Hushi helplessly came out from her space, secretly praying in her heart. She only wished that when Dan hatched in the future, it wouldn't be so spoiled, otherwise, she would become penniless. Waking up the next day, Hushi happily discovered that the pain in her meridians and dantian had almost disappeared. After hesitating for a while, she finally decided to go on time to meet Nangong Yu at Wanfeng Tea House. Although Zhukei's warning and attack yesterday had made her very unhappy, being able to advance her strength is more important. However, just before she left, Hushi called Imo-san to ask him about Hell King's background. Imo-san's face now looked lively. It was no longer in a state of panic like when he was controlled. His attitude towards Hushi more respectful, answering Master, His Highness, Hell King, can be said to be our Jinling country's #1 man. Regardless of whether it's his strength or control, the power in his hand makes even Jinling's royal family and every influential family not dare to rashly provoke him. This subordinate once heard that he possessed amazing innate talent, becoming a gold core martial artist at the age of 15. At the time his core was formed, the ninth heaven's black thunder appeared in the sky, shocking the entire Mi-Luo continent. Afterwards, because all the influential parties were afraid of his powerful innate talent, they at once sent the highest-level martial artists to secretly kill him. But no one was able to injure the Hell King in the slightest. Instead, they all died in his hands. Hushi frowned, her heart shocked by Nangong Yu's powerful strength. He was just 15 years old when he had reached Gold Core stage. Immerse continued, "It is said that the Hell King's outward appearance is handsome, just like a demon, surpassing the beauty of a woman. Yet his temperament is extremely cold and mercilessly cruel when killing." 2 years ago, the troops from magical beasts in the west of Guijin mountain range suddenly assembled, invading Jinling's border in a large-scale attack. The king of Jinling dispatched several tens of thousand elite troops to face the enemy, but their general was killed by magical beasts, then the whole army was destroyed. At that time, people in Jinling were panicking, thinking that the day people would starve and their country would fall to ruin had come. Though unexpectedly, the mere 18-year-old Hell King had suddenly led thousands of Metal Chilan troops to the Guijin mountain range, and with his strength, he killed the leader of magical beasts, then annihilated the troops from magical beasts. Some people said that the war was extremely tragic, flesh and blood flying everywhere, people blown to pieces, until the soil on the battlefield on Guijin mountain range was soaked by blood, so that to this day, it's still a reddish-brown. If ordinary people near the battlefield, there's 7 apertures, 1. Will shed blood because of the impact of the land. The title of His Highness, the King of Hell, was bestowed from the war. It means King of the Underworld, ruling over the life and death of the human world, controlling the 6 paths of reincarnation, 2. Hushi momentarily couldn't calm down after hearing Immerse's recounting. Extremely cold temperament, mercilessly cruel when killing, ruling over the life and death of the human world, controlling the 6 paths of reincarnation. But what appeared before her eyes was only a man with demonic charm and an annoying, smiling expression. Were these 2 very different people really the same person? Hushi ate breakfast, then seeing the time had reached Chin 3, she prepared to leave. After just leaving the courtyard's small path, under the mount cliff not far away, she could see 2 children squatting. The boy looked to be around 15 to 16 years old, while the girl looked to be around 7 to 8 years old, both of them wearing shabby clothes. 1. The 7 apertures of the human head, 2 eyes, 2 ears, 2 nostrils, 1 mouth. 2 6 paths of reincarnation. In the cycle of reincarnation, it is possible to be reborn as either A. 1. Deva, 2. Azura, 3. Human, 4. Animal, 5. Hungry ghost, or 6. A tormented being in hell. 3. 7-9 Am. Chapter 68, The Brother and Sister Pair. With a glance, Hushi was able to recognize the 2 people as being the brother and sister pair that she had saved in front of Ji Sheng Hall yesterday. But compared to their miserable appearances of yesterday, with their hair neatly combed, revealing 2 washed clean faces, they now looked more neat and tidy. Although the youth's stature was thin, his eyebrows were like swords over starry eyes, while the little girl's face was carved with powder, and combined with the jade-colored outfit she was wearing, it looked absolutely adorable. Together, they stood up when they saw Hushi approaching, 2 pairs of bright eyes looking at her earnestly. The youth stepped forward, bowing gratefully. "Many thanks to young master's kindness for saving me yesterday. My name is Wu Qi. This is my sister, Shaoli." Today, the little girl's face looked innocently refreshed, not a trace of yesterday's sadness left. She bashfully hid behind the youth and timidly said, "Thank you for saving my brother yesterday." However, Hushi immediately frowned while cautiously eyeing them. "How did you find me here?" She was able to cast off those people from Jisheng Hall and Shengda Hall when they were following her, even discovering Qinglong's tracking of her. So how could she be found in front of her door by these 2 children? The youth, Wu Qi, sensed her cautiousness, quickly pulling the little girl out from hiding behind his back, explaining, "Young master, please don't be suspicious. We don't have any evil intentions and we didn't really follow you. Due to my sister Shaoli's innate gift, she's able to communicate with animals, and she She asked the insects and birds that were hiding in every corner of the city. With that, we were able to find you here. Hushi was shocked. She hadn't expected that there was a person who was able to communicate with animals in this world. Her gaze fell on the brother and sister, seeing the little girl named Xiao Li's blushing face. With her somewhat afraid look, it couldn't conceal the gratefulness and fondness in her eyes as she stared at Hushi. Hushi understood the thoughts of an innocent person more than anyone, that treasuring a jade ring would become a crime, getting a person into trouble on account of a cherished item. A person's talent will arouse the envy of others. This youth, without even the slightest hesitation, had just revealed their secret. Was it just to eliminate her suspicions towards them? As if understanding the direction of Hushi's thoughts, Wu Qi quickly said, I hope young master can take Xiao Li under your care, to ensure that her life is safe and sound. Xiao Li's ability was certainly very powerful. She was able to communicate with fish, birds, beasts, and all animals in the ground. For assassins, using the information to spy and investigate, it was simply a perfect weapon. However, a pie doesn't just fall from the sky. Hushi didn't believe that she would gain a huge benefit just like that, without the need to take responsibility. Remaining calm and collected, she asked, You can see that I'm merely an insignificant ordinary person without a cultivation base. Considering that my martial power isn't equal to yours, how can you think that I would be able to protect your sister? Besides, why should I help you too? She'd saved this youth just because she had recalled the suffering in her past. While the most important reason was that she had wanted to understand medical treatments and the level of medical skills in this world, not out of any sort of compassion. Hushi didn't need other people's gratitude. Wu Qi startled, staring blankly when he heard what was said. However, not the slightest trace of disappointment or anger appeared on his face. Instead, he suddenly knelt on the ground. Young master, I, Wu Qi, is willing to vow with my own blood. I will settle all accounts with my family's enemy. Then, when I come back, I will recognize you as my master and serve you. From now on, Xiao Li and I will only obey young master's orders. Hushi raised her eyebrows. You want to become my slaves? No. Wu Qi quickly shook his head. We want to be young master's servants, not slaves. In Mi Luo continent, a slave can't have independent thoughts. They're also unable to cultivate to advance their levels. It can be said that their existence is the lowest of the low. As for a servant, although nearly the same, they have a master and servant relationship. They are perfectly happy and most willing to serve their master, just like Qinglong and Nangongyu. Chapter 69. To devote one's life. Saying that, Wu Qi took out 2 dark green transparent tablets with faint streaks of dark red jade, handing them over to Hushi. These are my and Xiao Li's life jade tablets. They're refined from our blood. If the jade tablets are broken, we will be overcome with great sorrow, then finally die. Hushi took the jade tablets, her fingers lightly touching the warm surface. After her divine senses had slightly examined them, she believed the youth's words. These jade tablets stored extraordinary spiritual power inside, and she could faintly sense auras similar to the 2 children. However, Hushi's heart still had doubts. Why did you find me? With Xiao Li's extraordinary ability, this world would have plenty of people willing to offer shelter to you. I don't have any defensive abilities, so why should you find me? In this world, many greedy people want to take advantage of us, even stripping us to the bone to obtain our benefits. Wu Qi revealed a ridiculing bitter smile on his face, immediately after he raised his head and looked towards Hushi, his gaze shining. Xiao Li said, Young master is a good person. I would like to believe in Xiao Li's judgment. Hushi fiddled with the jade tablets in her hand while sneering. Oh, a good person? This is the first time I've heard someone evaluate me that way. Is it because I saved you? Xiao Li, who had still been hiding behind Wu Qi, timidly peeked her head out, her voice like a mosquito's. You are a good person. The animals in the ground and little birds have told Xiao Li. Moreover, brother has said, for the kindness of saving a life, one must devote one's life. Therefore, Xiao Li and brother want to follow you. When Wu Qi heard that, his face turned red, embarrassedly saying, Xiao Li, don't speak randomly. To devote one's life isn't used like that. Xiao Li blinked in confusion, her glass-like colored eyes fixedly staring at her brother, before switching to look at Hushi. Hushi put the jade tablets away, lightly laughing. Since it's like this, then you too can stay. However, I'll tell you now, if you follow at my side, you need to be completely loyal and keep anything you hear to yourselves. For every day that I'm alive, I'll certainly protect you. But if you dare to betray and scheme against me, Humph, I dare to guarantee that you would suffer to where it would feel like having your heart pierced by thousands of arrows. Hushi's words made Xiaoli jump with shock, so she hid behind Wu Qi's back again in fear. However, Wu Qi sighed in relief. This kind of fondness and hate was clearly a promise and a warning that made him feel relieved. Relief at handing over the life jade tablets, relief at vowing their loyalty and devotion, and relief at entrusting his sister. Wu Qi dragged Xiaoli to Hushi's side, gently stroking her head. His eyes exposed his sadness and a strong reluctance to part. His voice heavy, "Good Xiaoli, you must listen to young master's words, do you know that? Brother will soon come back to find you." "Brother?" Xiaoli pulled at Wu Qi's sleeve, tears streaming down her face, her eyes filled with unwillingness. She knew her brother had to leave her to do something dangerous, but she didn't know if her brother would be able to return safely, so she was extremely reluctant and sad. However, she knew that the thing her brother wanted to do, he would certainly accomplish it. She shouldn't be crying, otherwise it would make her brother sad too. Xiaoli tightly clutched Wu Qi's sleeve while crying, "Brother, Xiaoli will be obedient. I'll wait for brother to return. So brother, you must come back soon." When Wu Qi finally walked away, Xiaoli wiped her tears, but new tears fell straight away. Hushi, who was standing on the side, looked at the sky. The agreed time for meeting with Nangongyu was approaching, so she finally sighed and walked forward to place a hand on Xiaoli's small head. "Why do you have to cry? It's not like you two will be separated forever. Your brother is very powerful. He will certainly come back." Chapter 70. You're not allowed to call me your highness. Hell King. After this youth called Wu Qi had recovered from his injury, Hushi had examined him but was completely unable to detect his cultivation base. She could only say that his strength was definitely stronger than her own. Moreover, it wasn't just stronger by a little. Xiaoli felt Hushi's gentle caress and a surge of emotion rose within her heart, so she turned around to hug Hushi, crying, "Xiaoli doesn't want brother to die, Wu." Hushi helplessly said, all right, I'll promise you. As long as your brother returns, if he's sustained any heavy injuries, I will cure him. If it's like this you feel more assured, right?" Xiaoli cried again, wiped her nose and tears on Hushi, then under Hushi's comfort, ceased her crying. Hushi told her to go to the courtyard to find wet Nurse Chun, then hurriedly headed towards Wanfeng tea house. She was just about to use her qinggong to quickly depart, when suddenly, from behind Hushi, she heard Xiaoli's childish voice, hoarse from crying too long. "I knew Big Sister was a good person. Xiaoli likes Big Sister the most." Hushi's foot stumbled, causing her to nearly fall to the ground. To be able to communicate with animals and so on, it's good to use it against an enemy, but to use it on her, that's too troublesome. She wouldn't have any privacy. Hushi arrived at Wanfeng tea house in a hurry, where Nangongyu was already waiting. Seeing the picturesque appearance of a youth dressed in white clothes and a fur coat slowly walk over, Nangongyu's originally indifferent eyes suddenly shone bright. Even the corner of his mouth lifted into a slight smile. Qinglong, who stood on the side, had followed Nangongyu for many years. He could clearly sense that his master's mood was very good today. As he snuck a peek at the jade crest that bound the youth's hair, Qinglong felt his mouth twitch, breaking his cold and indifferent expression. Master's attitude towards this boy was very good. He had been waiting impatiently in the tea house since early in the morning, and before going out, he had even changed his clothes several times. This in no way resembled the behavior of one going out to meet an ordinary youth lacking cultivation. This was just like he was going out to meet his beloved person. When Hushi saw Nangongyu, she felt herself become absent-minded in an instant. That man, amongst the youths, possessed a handsome face that could turn all people upside down. At this moment, he was dressed in a dark purple brocade robe embroidered with a line of silver. Attached to his waist he wore a ring of tassels, and a jade crown sat upon his head, containing his fine black hair, exposing his exquisite facial features and the smiling expression in his eyes. The faint morning light shone down on him, and the man's eyes looked straight at her. The light in his eyes was luminous, as if they reflected the world and all living things. However, as it happened, it was only to her that he showed this expression. Hushy's heart slammed against her chest, almost completely absorbed in that focused gaze. But the next moment, she recalled Zhu Kei's warning. Remembering that she felt that it was beneath her dignity last night, she felt a slight throb in her heart, very quickly replacing her expression with a cold stare. A trusted servant's attitude was sometimes a reflection of their master's mind. This man before her eyes was the outstanding and famous king of hell, the talented genius who formed a gold core at just 15 years old. How could he care about her, the kind of trash that didn't know whether she would be able to cultivate or not? Hushy retained the expression on her face, and taking several steps forward said, "Your Highness, Hell King, I've arrived. May I ask now how I can remove the seal on my dantian?" Nangong Yu's face suddenly sank, the smiling expression in his eyes disappearing as his body released a sharp burst of power pressure. "I've already said that you're not allowed to call me Your Highness, Hell King, again." Hushy jolted from the invisible power pressure, her face paling. No matter how hard she thought about it, she still couldn't figure it out. How could he become so displeased just because of an address? However, a wise man knows better than to fight when the odds are against him, so she immediately corrected herself. "Nangong Yu, a moment ago, I was wrong." Chapter 71. Fifth rank Yuan Yang Fruit. Once the words had left her mouth, she despised herself for acting so servile to curry favor. She didn't do anything wrong. Why should she have to lower herself to acknowledge her supposed mistake? Nangong Yu's expression lightened slightly as he released a faint laugh. "In the future, if you repeat your mistake, this king will certainly not forgive you easily." Hushy was scared by those luminous eyes. They seemed to have yet another deep meaning in their gaze as they watched her. Without waiting for her to retort, she heard Nangong Yu continue speaking. "Let's go. There's some distance from here to our destination. We're talking while walking." Nangong Yu's cultivation base had already reached the stage where he was able to fly. However, Hushy was just an ordinary person. Furthermore, there's a rule in Yinjing City that forbids martial artists from large-scale fights, as well as an order banning them from disturbing people by flying in the air. Therefore, the two of them walked side by side as they leisurely exited the tea house into the street. Nangong Yu looked tall and handsome, graceful and outstanding, while Hushy looked elegant and refined, a pure and bright youth. The two of them walking together naturally became a grand view, able to attract the attention of all living things. Passers-by who were coming and going occasionally turned their heads as they walked by them, their stunned gazes firmly attached to the pair. It even was to the point where they would walk right into a wall, completely unaware of their surroundings. If you want to remove the seal on your muddled dantian, you need a yang object. In this world, a yang object is very difficult to find, but fortunately, the power of your seal has gradually weakened. Now you only need to find a fiery yang object at its peak. That will do. The effect of a 5th rank Yuan Yang Fruit 1 is more than enough. Yuan Yang Fruit? Even though Hushy knew almost nothing about this world, she didn't know about 5th rank spiritual plants. Their value was so high that no matter how much yuan she has, she would still be unable to obtain one. Nangong Yu saw her anxious face and looked left and right before he continued speaking to her. "Do you know the Ouyang family?" Hushy's expression stiffened, and shaking her head, she whispered, "I didn't even know you were the famous Hell King. How can I know who the Ouyang family is?" Nangong Yu leaned his head closer as he looked at her, saying meaningfully, "In the country of Jinling, the Ouyang family, Nalan family, and Murong family are the 3 great influential families. The master of the Ouyang family, Ouyang Zhixiang, controls hundreds of thousands of troops and horses, and was bestowed the title of the mighty general. It could be said that no one in Yinjing City doesn't know who he is." Hushy grew flustered under his gaze and quickly said, "What does all this have to do with me?" Nangong Yu slightly laughed. Although 5th rank spiritual plants aren't regarded as high level, but because of the yuan yang fruit's particular attribute, they are very rare. It just so happens that Ouyang Zhixiang has 2 yuan yang fruit in his hands. Hushi's eyes suddenly brightened, then immediately after, she frowned. Since yuan yang fruit is so precious, and Ouyang Zhixiang a famous general, how could it be possible for him to easily sell yuan yang fruit to me? Not to mention, she couldn't afford to buy such a precious thing. Of course he won't sell it. Nangongyu shook his head, however. Ouyang Zhixiang only has one son, Ouyang Haoshuan. He was considered a genius amongst his peers, as at only 26 years old, his cultivation base had already reached gold core stage. Unfortunately, a year ago, when he was cultivating in Magical Beast Forest, he was attacked, and not only was his cultivation base completely crippled, even the muscles and tendons throughout his body were severed. Ouyang Zhixiang had invited doctors from throughout Jinling, even seeking help from the Doctors Association, but he still couldn't find anyone capable of treating Ouyang Haoshuan's illness. Ouyang Haoshuan is the only direct bloodline descendant of the Ouyang family, so if he dies, Ouyang Zhixiang's position as the family's master will likely fall to a distant relative. Therefore, Ouyang Haoshuan's illness isn't limited to his own life and death, it also affects the fate of the whole Ouyang family. You tell me, which would be more important, 2 insignificant yuan yang fruit, or the fate of the Ouyang family? The 1, yuan yang, yuan can mean first, origin, while yang can mean son, male. Chapter 72. Ouyang Manor. Hushi was stunned after hearing that, and after quite a while, she finally murmured, "You taking me to Ouyang Manor? Is it because you want me to cure Ouyang Haoshuan's illness? What? You don't have any confidence you'll be able to do it?" Nangongyu smiled sarcastically. "If you don't have the ability to cure Ouyang Haoshuan's illness, we better return home now, before it's too late. Afterwards I'll just find another yuan yang fruit for you." Nangongyu's implications were barely spoken, yet Hushi had already raised her eyebrows, her elegant face filled with confidence as she proudly asked, "Who said I didn't have any confidence? I can't cure a mere meridian fracture?" As the girl disguised as a youth said these haughty words, her beautiful phoenix eyes narrowed slightly, bursting with a silvery purple light. Those dazzling eyes were like a whirlpool, firmly attracting Nangongyu's attention. Curiously extending his hand, he gently held Hushi's wrist as he softly asked, "Yesterday, I sent my people to give you medicine. Have you used it?" Finished asking, he lifted Hushi's sleeve to see her arm. Who knew that he had asked the wrong question, as once he asked it, Hushi recalled the unpleasant experience from last night. Her expression cold, she quickly withdrew her hand. "Don't trouble yourself. Just a small insignificant injury means nothing to me." That's right, whether it's the Hushi of her previous life, or the Nalan Hushi from this present life, she has long since become accustomed to these types of physical injuries, so they meant nothing. She has always managed everything on her own, so she doesn't need concern from other people now. Nangongyu's eyes darkened, wanting to argue with her, but seeing her stubborn face he sighed, secretly transmitting his voice into her mind instead. "Remember, don't reveal your identity as Nalan Hushi. Nowadays, Ouyang family and Nalan family hate each other to the bone. If they knew of your identity, it's unknown whether we would be able to get the yuan yang fruit or not." Hushi frowned, and just when she was about to ask what grudges the 2 families held, Nangongyu softly interrupted, "We've arrived. Ouyang Manor." At this moment, in Ouyang Haoshuan's room, the door and windows were tightly closed, the entire room circulating a strong medicinal smell. The air was stale, making people feel nauseous. The inside of the room was filled with specks of candlelight, also several priceless night pearls. But due to the lack of sunshine, the room was still pitch black, carrying an oppressive feeling that made a person feel suffocated. Currently, Madame Ouyang sat on the short couch beside the bed, her hair messy, eyes red and swollen, with medicine stains not yet wiped up on her clothes. She watched her son on the bed who had been tortured like a puppet, begging while crying grievously, "Haoshuan, Mother begs you to obediently take your medicine. All right? If you don't take these medicines, your 5 viscera and 6 bowels will soon become exhausted and you'll die." On the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan's face was dejected. His beard had grown long and unkempt, making him look ragged, while his eyes were sunken in. His entire person was brimming with a depressed aura of one nearing death. He laughed loudly when he heard what was said, his hoarse voice carrying despair. "Mother, I also beg you, just let me die." Living without dignity like this, without the strength to even commit suicide, then what's the point of being alive? It's better to kill me. Let me die a clean death. Heard that, Madame Ouyang's crying became even more grievous, and throwing herself on the edge of the bed, she grabbed her son's hand, murmuring, "Xian heir, your father has already gone to seek help from the Doctors' Association, searching all lands under the heavens for good medicine. In this world, there will inevitably be a person who will be able to cure you. You can't give up now. Mother, you mustn't deceive me and yourself again." Ouyang Haoshuan's throat issued a gurgling noise, like a dying old woman's low cough. "Even Nailan Zhengza has come and seen me but couldn't cure me. I absolutely can't be cured in this lifetime. I've been destined to an early end. Mother, just let me die, okay?" Chapter 73. Ouyang Haoshuan's despair. "Mother only has you, this one child." Madame Ouyang wailed, grabbing Ouyang Haoshuan's hands. She didn't want to let go. "If you die, what about Mother? What about your father? Xian heir, those people who harmed you still haven't received retribution. And now that Ouyang family's relatives are eager for you to die, are you truly willing to die cowardly like this? Are you in such a rush for your parents to be so full of sorrow and hatred?" Ouyang Haoshuan stayed expressionless, his blank eyes projecting his despair while unwilling tears gathered. Previously, he was Ouyang family's most dazzling genius. Other people looked up to him, envied him, admired him. He was the pride of his parents. He was also Ouyang family's future hope. However, in the blink of an eye, that genius had crumbled into dust. The fine jade was covered in dust and shattered into hundreds of pieces, his cultivation base and body becoming crippled, turning him into a person who couldn't even take care of himself. Every day, besides lying down on the bed, he couldn't do anything. He even needed other people's hands to help him eat, to avoid the food spilling. He has been restricted to laying down in this dark and stale-smelling room for more than a year already. In this 1 year, he has lost all his pride, lost his dignity, and lost his will to live. Every day, he only longed to die quickly, rather than live life like a dead person. However, his mother's words ignited the hatred and wrath lurking deep down in his heart. Those black-dressed people that schemed against him in the magical beast forest, those scums that dragged him into a trap, he still hasn't personally taken revenge, personally making them pay a debt of blood with blood. How can he be willing to die? How can he be willing to give up like this? Inside the room, brimming with Madame Ouyang's weeping sounds, occasionally mixed with Ouyang Haoshuan's destitute beast-like yells, the atmosphere was permeated with despair, enough that it could make a person's heart grieve. Just at this moment, the room's door was suddenly pushed open, and Ouyang Zhixiong entered with large steps. His face was devoid of the usual anxiousness. Instead, his eyes shined with astonishment. "Madam, quickly help Haoshuan to tidy up. The genius doctor has arrived. He will immediately come to give medical treatment to Haoshuan." Madame Ouyang startled, wiping the tears from her eyes as she asked, "Genius doctor? Could it be an elder you've invited from the Doctors' Association?" Ouyang Zhixiong shook his head. "All the elders from the Doctors' Association are mysterious, their whereabouts uncertain. How could I find them in such a short time? However, this time the one I've found, even though he's not an 8th-rank doctor, his medical skill has reached perfection. Believe me, he will certainly be able to save Haoshuan." Madame Ouyang's eyes shined, and with a trembling voice she asked, Really? My lord, you've truly found a person who is able to save Haoshuan?" "Father, you don't have to waste your energy." Lying on the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan remained unmoved in the slightest. Instead, the expression on his face became more mournful. "Didn't all the doctors that previously come to Ouyang Manor say that I would live, but that my muscles and bones were dead, resulting in how I am now?" His mouth opened a crack, and chuckling, a sinister expression spread across his face. Every one of them fled after taking my pulse, especially Jinling Country's #1 majestic, highly skilled doctor, Nalan Zhengze. After he diagnosed me as incurable, he unexpectedly withdrew my engagement between our Ouyang family and his Nalan family. Even more, the news that I had become a crippled person spread everywhere, making me a laughingstock throughout Jinling. Haha, indeed. He's the country's highly skilled doctor, a very good doctor. When he mentioned the Nalan family, Ouyang Zhixiong and Madame Ouyang right away started gnashing their teeth with loathing. Because of their political connections, and because of Madame Ouyang and Madame Nalan's handkerchief friendship, 1. The two families had made an agreement for Ouyang Haoshuan and the second Miss, Nalan Feishue, to marry when he was of marriageable age. 1. Handkerchief friendship used to describe childhood friends, or friends who share everything, happiness and sadness. Chapter 74. Genius Doctor is Your Master? Previously, the graceful Ouyang Haoshuan, who was handsome, talented, and outstanding, was a match to Nalan Feishue, who was merely at the foundation establishment stage. Nevertheless, the Ouyang family had still acknowledged this marriage, including the Nalan family, who had regarded it as a decent marriage. But who would have thought that once Ouyang Haoshuan faced difficulties, the Nalan family would turn out to be such hostile people, refusing to acknowledge the marriage, and then spreading Ouyang Haoshuan's miserable condition to the public. Ouyang Haoshuan was once a dazzling star, and now that he had fallen into the mud, naturally, the people who had originally envied him now threw stones at him, rejoicing in his misfortune. Now branch relatives from the Ouyang family were covetously eyeing the position of the family's master. Even Nalan Feishue's people that had once admired him came to their door just to sneer at Ouyang Haoshuan. Now that he has become a toad that can't climb up from a mud pit, they go so far as to dare clamor around Nalan Feishue, thinking of her as a swan one. Afterwards, the Ouyang family had found out that it was Nalan Feishue and Madame Nalan who had spread those rumors on purpose. This left the Ouyang family no choice but to break the engagement, making everyone focus on Ouyang Haoshuan's decline. No one paid any attention to the Nalan family's ungratefulness over renouncing the alliance contract. Due to these events, the Ouyang family hated the Nalan family to the bone, especially the vicious and shameless Nalan Feishue. They were itching to tear her apart. Ouyang Zhixiong started becoming angry, but seeing his son's grief-filled appearance, he couldn't help but feel sad. His voice soft as he said, "Haoshuan, you are our Ouyang family's hope. How can you say you want to give up? Father guarantees that this time's genius doctor and the previous ones are different. Father personally saw him cure a person with broken meridians. That person is now healthy and able to walk. Believe me, he will certainly be able to cure you." Madame Ouyang was surprised and happy after hearing this. Her voice raised in excitement. "My lord, was what you just said true?" "Of course it's true," Ouyang Zhixiong said. "Yesterday, when I was with His Highness, Hell King, together we saw that genius doctor save a person. His Highness, Hell King, and him are acquaintances. It's absolutely not false." Madame Ouyang suddenly started crying with joy, wiping her tears as she said, "Haoshuan, Haoshuan, did you hear that? You can be saved. You can be saved. Quickly call someone to come help young master tidy up. Invite the genius doctor to come in." Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes brightened, but immediately after, they once again became gloomy. It's not that he didn't want to be cured. It's just that he had experienced happiness turn to disappointment for more than a year already. It caused the little hope he had carried to long be extinguished, changing it into a deep despair. The moment Hushi walked into Ouyang Haoshuan's room, she sensed depression, deathly silence, darkness, and the intense smell of medicine. Madame Ouyang stared blankly when she saw Hushi, the light of hope in her eyes suddenly extinguishing, transforming into confusion and deep disappointment. She didn't think that this so-called genius doctor would actually be a youth with red lips and white teeth, who looked weak and without any strength. He didn't have the slightest resemblance to a high-level doctor. They normally have the appearance of a sage. However, Madame Ouyang was unwilling to give up and couldn't help but ask, "This young master, may I ask, is the genius doctor your master? Is it possible to invite him to come save my family's Haoshuan?" Ouyang Zhixiong's complexion changed. He glanced at the smile that wasn't a smile on the face of His Highness, Hell King, and quickly took a step forward to stop Madame Ouyang. Madam, don't talk recklessly. This is the exceptionally talented young genius doctor. Madame Ouyang jumped in shock, and as her heart brimmed with despair and disappointment, tears gathered in the corners of her eyes. Hushi had long become accustomed to this kind of situation, where she was judged by her appearance. Previously, although her medical skills were high, they were often used to kill people, not save people. But even then, there is no doctor who wouldn't get angry from not being trusted. So as a result, instead of becoming unwilling, her gaze coldly swept past the Ouyang couple before she then walked to the front of the bed. One that she's better than him. Chapter 75. If it can be treated? The ambience in the room was already heavy and gloomy, yet on the bed, it seemed to gather 100-fold. The strong smell of medicine mixed together with a sour, moldy smell, as if it was trying to create the world's gloomiest atmosphere. Ouyang Haoshuan had been lying down in this kind of dark room, his features cold, his skin appearing a pale ashen color, while his eyes were bloodshot in deep-set sockets. At this time, these eyes were fixedly staring at her, not a trace of hope visible, only endless darkness filled with coldness and despair. Obviously, compared to Wu Qi, this person's condition was more severe, regardless of whether it was his body or his spirit. Hushi focused, grabbing his wrist to take his pulse. Once she took his pulse, her eyebrows furrowed. Just like she thought, Ouyang Haoshuan's illness, compared to Wu Qi's, was several times more severe. The meridians throughout his body appeared to be fractured, while several fractures were in extremely crucial places. Once they were severed, forget about only losing spiritual power, just normally sitting or standing up to walk would be unachievable. And most importantly, there was the trace of a highly toxic poison within Ouyang Haoshuan's body, causing his meridians to wither day by day. The poison that resided in his body was the kind that if he attempted to use his internal energy, the poison would feed off it, gradually increasing and spreading. So although fractured meridians would cause the body to be unable to operate and cultivate, a martial artist used their internal energy to live. How could they stop using that? Thus, this poison would keep accumulating until it spread throughout the body, eventually entering the dantian. Hushi didn't know what kind of poison it was, but she thought that the person who used this poison to sever his meridians was extremely sinister. That person not only wanted to make Ouyang Haoshuan fall, but wanted to make him suffer endlessly painful torture before he died. Now, Ouyang Haoshuan's meridians were already withered, close to the extent of being completely blocked. If it was just a few days later, perhaps even she would have been unable to do anything about it. As he laid on the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan saw the youth's grave face, causing him to clench his hands for a moment without loosening them. He couldn't help but sneer, and with a hiss in his voice said, "Don't waste your energy. Since you're unable to treat me, then you should quickly get lost. Don't come again to Ouyang Manor to swindle us." At this moment, Hushi had already finished taking his pulse. Withdrawing her hands while looking at the man's face filled with anger, she laughed coldly. "Oh, then if I can treat you?" Ouyang Haoshuan was speechless, his expression sluggish as he felt himself being looked at by those cold eyes, his entire body freezing. Ouyang Zhixiong quickly said, "Genius Dr. Shi, as long as you're able to cure my son, my Ouyang family is willing to agree to any of your conditions." Hushi tapped her fingers on the table, then turned her head to look around and suddenly, in a heavy voice said, "Open all the windows, remove this thick bed sheet, and extinguish all the candles. I need this room to be bright with daylight." Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Zhixiong jumped in shock. Madame Ouyang immediately crying out in fear, "Absolutely not. Ever since Haoshuan fell ill, with only a slight breeze and sunshine, his whole body will ache incessantly and spasm as dark spots appear on his skin. Are you really a genius doctor? Could it be that you want to kill my chien heir?" At this time, even Ouyang Zhixiong was bewildered, not daring to speak. However, Hushi only sneered, and suddenly taking out a medicinal pill, she stuffed it into Ouyang Haoshuan's mouth. "I assure you, even when he is blown by the wind or exposed to the sun, he'll be all right. You can all either choose to believe in what I'm doing, or just find someone better qualified than me. Chapter 76. Poison. Saying that, she then headed to the door to leave without hesitation. Nangong Yu saw her eyes shine with a self-confident light, while his eyes reflected an expression of happiness. His woman should have this kind of spirit and imposing attitude. When asking for a favor, it wouldn't make her look humble. Rather, it would make people obediently deliver things into her hands. Seeing Hushi about to leave, Ouyang Zhixiong became anxious and glanced at the motionless Hell King. His heart immediately throbbed harshly, and clenching his teeth said, "You've heard Genius Dr. Shi's command. Quickly open the windows." "My lord," Madame Ouyang shouted. Ouyang Haoshuan closed his eyes as he lay on the bed. Tightly clenching his teeth with a grim face, he braced himself for the pain to come. Slowly, a gentle breeze blew into the room accompanied by the warm sunshine, both filled with rich, spiritual energy. For a moment, the intense smell of medicine and mold in the room were dispersed by the wind. And with the brightness replacing the darkness, it caused the entire room to no longer be covered in a deep haze, one resembling the underworld. Ouyang Haoshuan hesitated before he slowly opened his eyes. The first thing to enter his sight was the glaringly bright yet warm sunshine. In addition, under the glow of the sun, the youth's exquisite and matchless appearance was visible. Hushi's face was without a smile, without a trace of gentleness or softness. There was only icy arrogance and self-confidence. However, Ouyang Haoshuan's heart that was originally desperate and still, now, for no reason, surged with excitement. "Xian'er, how are you feeling? Do you feel pain anywhere?" Madame Ouyang nervously asked as she rushed to the front of the bed. Ouyang Haoshuan finally reacted. It didn't hurt. He didn't feel any pain. His body was neither spasming or breaking out in dark spots. Furthermore, his internal organs weren't shifting and breaking down from the pain. His astonished gaze fell on Hushi, his mouth opening and closing several times before finally, in a hoarse voice, he said, You're really able to cure me?" Hushi crossed her arms in front of her chest and faintly said, "Cure what? Cure your fractured meridians? Wasn't General Ouyang already convinced that I have such an ability, only then inviting me to come?" Yes. Ouyang Zhixiong finally responded. His son being able to stand the wind and sun without reacting in pain had caused him to feel like crying tears of joy, his eyes collecting glistening teardrops in their corners. "Genius Dr. Shi, please use your miraculous hands of a healer. Please save my son." Madame Ouyang also finally managed to react. She no longer doubted Hushi's medical skills. Immediately kneeling on the ground, she cried while beseeching Hushi to save her son. Hushi's expression was without doubt or fear as she signaled for Madame Ouyang to rise. I'll certainly be able to help treat his fractured meridians. However, young Master Ouyang's illness is so severe not because of the muscle and tendon fracture. Rather, he was poisoned. Poisoned? Ouyang Zhixiong exclaimed, then asked in disbelief, This is impossible. Previously, we had invited countless doctors to diagnose and treat Haoshuan, but not one of them gave even the slightest indication from their examination of Haoshuan that he was poisoned. Is it that in these past few days, someone broke into my Ouyang manor and gave poison to my son? In this world, poisons able to cause harm to martial artists were rare, not just because of the expensive price, but because they were really hard to find. In the end, who was it that was so sinister? Being able to see Haoshuan already fallen to such a degree, yet unexpectedly unwilling to let him off. Thinking until here, Ouyang Zhixiong glared in anger, his body emitting a strong power pressure. But Hushi was only an ordinary person, and Ouyang Zhixiong's cultivation base far exceeded her own. Now that this power pressure was completely utilized, although not aimed at her, it was still enough to make her face pale. Chapter 77. Medical Treatment. Just at this time, Nangong Yu walked to her side, his tall figure enveloping her, like he could protect her against his chest. In the blink of an eye, Hushi felt the power pressure on her body disappear, her pale complexion returning to normal. She raised her head, and as her eyes came into contact with his, she suddenly thought that his eyes were beautiful. Her reflection visible in his star-filled eyes, his burning gaze nearly melting her. Hushi suddenly lowered her head, took a deep breath, then looked towards Ouyang Zhixiong. No, young Master Ouyang has been poisoned for a very time. It has been at least a year and a half. If my guess isn't wrong, this kind of poison has a 90% possibility of being what caused young Master Ouyang's meridians to be severed in a flash when it was administered into his body. Ouyang Zhixiong stared blankly, immediately asking, "What kind of poison is that?" Even a fourth-rank doctor couldn't detect it. In this Miluo continent, when a low-rank doctor examines a sick person's body, they rely on their spiritual power to do the examining. Some don't even know where the meridians are located, while even more are unable to make their spiritual power penetrate into the sick person's meridians. This poison attaches itself to the human body's meridians and becomes extremely concealed. It also moves around the body, so based on an ordinary doctor's examination method, how could they find it? However, Hushi wasn't interested in wasting time to explain, only saying, "Have any of you seen a person with broken meridians unable to stand a gentle breeze or exposure to the sun? That is a symptom of being poisoned. But this poison is extremely sinister and strange. I'm also still unclear about what type of poison this is in the end." In fact, the things Ouyang Haoshuan couldn't tolerate wasn't the wind and sunshine. Rather, it was the spiritual energy that was carried in by the wind and sunshine. The spiritual energy makes the poison within his body spread rapidly and expand, causing Ouyang Haoshuan to experience a pain similar to that of being bitten and devoured. For her medical treatment this time, she needs a great amount of spiritual energy to enter Ouyang Haoshuan's body. So naturally, she will make the spiritual energy outside the room come in. But Madame Ouyang didn't care about the cause and effects, only asking with an anxious face, "May I ask if genius doctor she has a method to treat this illness?" Hushi pursed her lips. "I was just about to try." Following that, her gaze landed on the lifeless expression of Ouyang Haoshuan on the bed, and slowly said, "My medical treatment requires your cooperation. Now you tell me, do you believe that I'm able to cure you? That is to say, are you willing to accept my medical treatment?" Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes blankly fell on her face, and unaware of when, tears were already rolling down his cheeks. He suddenly tightly clenched his teeth until blood leaked from the corner of his mouth. Then, in a hoarse voice said, "Please, genius doctor, save me. As long as I'm able to recover, I will certainly face any peril, with no thought to my personal safety, to repay your kindness in the future." Hushi revealed a smile, but the smile didn't express joy. Instead, it was endlessly cold. "Very good. I like an obedient sick person." Finished speaking, she once again brought out several hundred different lengths of silver needles from her space. These acupuncture needles were made from black ice. To make them, you needed to use 10,000-year-old black ice from the most central position, where the cold air has gathered inside, and after making the silver needles, they needed to be placed in spring water at all times to soak. Now, it has become her necessary tool to treat and distinguish poisons. Under Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Haoshuan's astonished gaze, Hushi's skills were as quick as lightning, inserting 100 or more silver needles, one by one, into Ouyang Haoshuan's body. As the number of needles inserted into his body grew, Ouyang Haoshuan's face began to show a pained expression. With his jaw tightly clenched, blood steadily dripped from the corner of his mouth, while bean-sized beads of sweat rolled down from the spot between his tightly wrinkled eyebrows. "Haoshuan, Haoshuan, how is it?" Madame Ouyang stared at his painful appearance, her worried tears streaming down. "Genius Dr. Shi, why is Haoshuan in so much pain?" Chapter 78. Not enough spiritual power? Then I'll give you mine. "Mother, I'm all right." Ouyang Haoshuan chuckled, his voice hoarse. This was the first time he had really laughed. He was brimming with incredible surprise and hope. "Mother, my hands, my feet, I feel them. So painful. Ha ha ha, I feel them." He laughed and laughed, his tears falling down to mix with the blood on the corners of his mouth and the sweat collecting on his face, giving him a miserable yet sinister appearance. Who can understand the grief and despair of one who originally had boundless prospects as a star, yet could now only wait every day to die as he laid on a bed? His hands and feet didn't feel like his own. He couldn't clench his hands. He couldn't stand on his feet. To live like this, wouldn't it be better to die? But now, he could finally feel his hands and feet. After a lapse of 1.5 years, he finally could feel the existence of his 4 limbs again. Ouyang Haoshuan cried tears of joy. So what if at the cost was great pain? Compared to the despair and humiliation of before, the pain was insignificant. Madame Ouyang and Ouyang Zhixiong's expressions suddenly changed, and they wanted to rush over to the bed. Unfortunately, they could only tearfully endure it as they were afraid they would disturb Hushi's movements. Hushi finally finished inserting all of the silver needles, feeling exhaustion throughout her body. However, the treatment had just begun. The next part was the crucial point. She discovered that perhaps because the people in this world were all martial cultivators, their bodies could endure more. Resembling tempered and refined magical items, the internal energy running in their meridians was much stronger. So compared to her previous life, it was 100 times more difficult, causing her internal energy to be greatly consumed. Ouyang Haoshuan's body had been slowly consumed by poison for more than a year, causing him to become weak. Otherwise, even for her, being able to finish inserting the whole set of 108 silver needles would be a problem. Next, she had to force the poison out through the silver needles, but this was a very difficult process. Shiyu, you can try to use spiritual power. A gentle and low voice suddenly sounded in her ears. Hushi startled, and turning her head, she saw Nangong Yu's dazzlingly bright, handsome face, making her heart unconsciously palpitate. It's impossible. With difficulty, Hushi made up her mind, shaking her head. I'm unable to transfer enough spiritual power. It's not that she hadn't thought of using this method. Anyone would think of testing it out first. But if she wanted to hasten the expulsion of the poison, she needed to pour internal energy into the countless meridian branches. During this process, if she missed even one spot, the poison would instantly gather, causing Ouyang Haoshuan's body to explode. Using spiritual power would of course be much simpler and more effective than using internal energy, but she simply couldn't store spiritual power. Depending only on the tiny bit she had to penetrate into his meridians and survive, how could it be enough? Still, Nangong Yu only raised a corner of his mouth, laughing slightly. If I tell you try, I'll naturally ensure a way for your spiritual power to be sufficient. Finished speaking, Hushi felt a wide palm press on her sleeve, and from the palm, a warmth was transmitted through her thin clothing to her skin, making her body quiver and stretch closer. Nangong Yu's low laughter, deep and full of magnetism, reached her ears carrying clear delight. Hushi's face darkened, and just when she was about to step away from him, she suddenly sensed refreshing spiritual power slowly infuse her body. The exhaustion in her body instantly disappeared without a trace, and even her originally dried-up dantian began to stir. In a flash, Hushi realized Nangong Yu's intentions. She only needed to continue the treatment, and if she didn't have enough spiritual power, he would replenish it. That sort of lofty and domineering attitude. Hushi's face reddened, however. She no longer refused. Instead, she concentrated, removing a silver needle that was longer than a foot and slightly thicker than hair from her space. Chapter 79. Strange poison under Madame Ouyang's alarmed gaze. She slowly inserted the silver needle into the acupuncture point at Ouyang Haoshuan's spine, continuing to push it in until only a finger length remained visible. The slightest thread of spiritual power gathered at Hushi's back, traveling along her meridians to her fingertips. It then flowed down her fingertips to the silver needles, penetrating into Ouyang Haoshuan's body. Suddenly, an image like an X-ray appeared in Hushi's mind, clearly showing an internal view of the meridian tracks within Ouyang Haoshuan. She could completely see his spiritual power points, the filth that blocked them, and the tiny scars they had left. Under the pressure from the spiritual power, the silver needles inserted into Ouyang Haoshuan's body trembled, and slowly, like rising water, the spiritual power spread and began to repair Ouyang Haoshuan's fractured meridians. Ah, dash. Unable to bear it, Ouyang Haoshuan issued a shrill scream. Madame Ouyang's complexion went deathly pale, and she moved to rush forward and check on him, but Ouyang Zhixiang, with a similar complexion, pulled her to a stop. He knew clearly that disturbing a doctor during treatment could affect the outcome, wasting all previous efforts. If that were to happen, then curing Haoshuan really would be hopeless. Hushi's ears were in pain due to Ouyang Haoshuan's screams, so without any hesitation, she seized a rag laying on the side and stuffed it into Ouyang Haoshuan's mouth. Immediately, the only sounds remaining in the room were Ouyang Haoshuan's muffled screams and Madame Ouyang's stifled sobs. Behind Hushi, the corner of Nangong Yu's mouth raised, revealing a slight smile as he pressed against her back. But Hushi didn't care about their reactions, beginning to seriously examine Ouyang Haoshuan's meridians instead. Along with the fractured meridians being repaired, the spiritual power began to move normally again, causing the poison in the meridians to flow quicker. The poison certainly wanted to spread and grow, however. The medicine that Hushi had recently fed to Haoshuan restrained the tiny organisms from reproducing. That was to say, this poison was able to keep increasing due to the fact that it wasn't a simple drug. Rather, it carried a highly poisonous single-celled organism. Hushi's spiritual power very quickly flowed along Ouyang Haoshuan's meridians, invading his dantian. When it penetrated his dantian, it made her scalp feel numb, causing the hand that gripped the large silver needle to almost loosen. Under the influence of inner inspect caused by the spiritual power, Hushi saw that Ouyang Haoshuan's dantian appeared to be the source of the poison. The outward appearance was ordinary, yet inside, it had long been turned pitch black by the poison. The poison kept moving, and as it advanced towards and traveled along the complicated crisscrossing meridians, it looked like countless small worms crawling about the interior of Ouyang Haoshuan's body. This scene was too strange and horrible. Hushi no longer hesitated, and quickly picking up several additional silver needles, she inserted them around his dantian, frantically gathering the spiritual power from Nangongyu and sending it into the silver needles. Soon, the poison stopped spreading, starting to be forced to approach the silver needles. Then, it squirmed along the silver needles until it seeped out to the surface of the body. All it took was several breaths' time from the silver needles being inserted into Ouyang Haoshuan's body for them to begin to be covered with thick black droplets. The unknown composition of black droplets carried a strong rotten stench, and while it should obviously be an ordinary liquid, it seemed to have life as it incessantly wiggled. This scene was too strange, causing the complexions of the watching Ouyang Zhixiong and Madame Ouyang to turn purple, their bodies trembling. Quickly grab them. Hushi's words were unfinished when Nangongyu had already taken out a porcelain bottle, and with the spiritual energy still entering the room, the black liquid was caught without any resistance. It took more than an hour for those silver needles to no longer exude black liquid, but by the end, Ouyang Haoshuan's face that had originally been in pain had gradually relaxed into a tranquil expression. Chapter 80. Compensated Kindness. Hushi heaved a long sigh of relief and began to pull the silver needles out of Ouyang Haoshuan's body one by one. Only after the last silver needle was replaced into her space did she then remove the rag in his mouth. "How are you feeling now?" Ouyang Haoshuan gasped heavily, lingering traces of fear remaining on his face from the severe pain, but even so, his eyes were shining brilliantly. No longer were filled with the despair and lifelessness from a few hours ago. Pain. I can feel pain all over my body, my hands and feet, meridians, even dantian. All feel a sharp biting pain. But I can sense spiritual power. The spiritual power is surging into my dantian. Ha ha ha. I can sense my spiritual power moving again. Madame Ouyang exclaimed in surprise and rushed to Ouyang Haoshuan's side, crying, "Xian Er, is what you say true? Genius Dr. Xian Er has been cured?" Hushi replied indifferently, "How could it be so easy? The accumulation of poison in his body is very large. It can't be entirely removed in an hour or two. The meridians in his body are also only tentatively repaired. At most, He can only sit. He will also still be unable to walk, and even more, he will still be unable to cultivate. Pausing here, under the husband and wife's hopeful gaze, she continued, in the future, I will need to come here every 3 days to administer acupuncture on young Master Ouyang to continue removing the poison and repairing his meridians. The most dangerous treatment time has passed. There will be no more difficulties when removing the remaining poison. Only that, during treatment, General Ouyang may need to transfuse spiritual power to young Master Ouyang's body to ensure that after the poison is expelled, his dantian won't be exhausted. No problem. No problem. Ouyang Zhixiong repeatedly said, as long as you can cure my son, I'm even willing to deplete my cultivation base. Laying on the bed, Ouyang Haoshuan's eyes reddened. His hand that was being held by Madame Ouyang turned over to hold her hand back. For more than a year he had lived life like a dead person, but it had been even more painful for his parents who loved him and were concerned for him. He decided that in the future he must not become dispirited again. It would only make his parents sorrowful while pleasing his enemies. Hushi took out several medicine pills to help purge the poison and restore energy, giving them to Madame Ouyang. Have him take one every day before he sleeps. It can suppress the poison in his body while helping to nourish his withered meridians. With difficulty, Ouyang Haoshuan stretched out his hands, his eyes filled with glistening teardrops. Supporting himself by holding on to Madame Ouyang, he sat up and looked gratefully at Hushi. Young Master Shi's kindness has given me a new lease on life. I, Ouyang Haoshuan, will remember this as long as I live. In the future, if young Master has any request, I, Ouyang Haoshuan, will tread water and walk through fire, unafraid of any difficulty, as long as I can accomplish it. At this time, Ouyang Haoshuan's cheekbones were deep-set and covered by a long beard, and with his face so haggard, his appearance was anything but handsome. However, those eyes he used to gaze at Hushi with were shining, causing Nan Gongyu to narrow his own in displeasure. Yet Hushi didn't care in the slightest, only coldly saying, You all don't need to thank me, because for me to expend a great deal of effort to save people is only natural if I have a request. I heard your Ouyang family have yuanyang fruit? All of a sudden, Ouyang Zhixiong came to a realization as he recalled what Hell King had said before, about him having something the genius doctor was seeking. Quickly, he ordered people to take out his collection of yuanyang fruit. Yuanyang fruit was precious and rare. It possessed a powerful effect of assisting people in advancing a rank. But when it was compared to the safety and life of his son, he regarded it as nothing. Without hesitation, Ouyang Zhixiong handed an exquisitely carved jade box over to Hushi. Hushi opened the jade box and suddenly felt a blazing flame directly hit her face, causing her complexion to instantly change. But the next moment, an invisible barrier was set in front of her, and a slender hand reached out to gently close the jade box. Then, a gloomy voice sounded in her ears, Shiyu, be careful. When using yuanyang fruit, you must first be wrapped with spiritual power, otherwise, you will easily burn yourself. Chapter 81. How about you give your heart to me? Hushi's face reddened, and she quickly threw the jade box containing the yuanyang fruit into her space. When she raised her head, she was stunned to notice Nan Gongyu's somewhat pale complexion, a thin layer of sweat dotting his forehead. She suddenly realized that after the treatment she didn't feel weak and tired like normal. Instead, she felt refreshed. Nan Gongyu had incessantly transferred his spiritual power to her for the needed treatment, and during this time, he had also continuously used his spiritual power to support her body. This in turn stopped her body from becoming weak, and prevented her meridians from feeling pain due to excessive use of spiritual power. Nan Gongyu. Why did he do this? These were obviously her own matters, saving Ouyang Haoshuan in exchange for the yuanyang fruit, then after obtaining the yuanyang fruit, using it to remove the seal on her dantian. None of these things had anything to do with Nan Gongyu, so why would he try so hard to help her? The expression in Hushi's eyes appeared somewhat complicated, and her red lips lightly moved as a near whisper spit out 2 words, thank you. But Nan Gongyu's next words quickly scattered the slightly touched feeling from the bottom of Hushi's heart. This king has been working hard. Did you think only saying a sentence of thank you was enough? Hushi pursed her lips. Then what do you want? Nangongyu bent his body, moving closer to her ear as he slowly said, how about you give your heart to me? The corner of Hushi's mouth thinned, and before she was able to speak, Ouyang Zhixiong had already ordered people to bring in a large chest of yuan. This is the medical fee my Ouyang family presents to genius Dr. Shi. You must accept this. After saying that, he picked up a jade tablet and handed it to Hushi, then patted his chest as he said, in the future, if there is anyone in this Jinling country who is disrespectful towards genius Dr. Shi, don't hesitate to take out this jade tablet. I'd like to see who would dare to touch people that I, Ouyang Zhixiong, protect. Hushi hadn't yet taken the jade tablet when she heard Nangongyu's cold laugh. My? Nangongyu's people need General Ouyang's protection? Nangongyu's icily low, arrogant voice was filled with a stern power pressure, making Ouyang Zhixiong's body shake, and as his gaze swept over Hushi and Nangongyu, his heart became bewildered. These two people, one is great and elegant, and one is as clear and bright as the moon. When they stand together, even the sun and the moon will lose their radiance. But these two people are both men, right? What was the meaning behind Hell King's words? Ouyang Zhixiong's expression kept changing, until finally, under Hell King's fixed gaze, he forced out a smile and said, Hell King, don't get angry. In this Jinling country, who would dare to provoke your people? It was me who was rude. This jade tablet is just a meeting gift between genius Dr. Shi and I. Please don't be offended. Hushi cast a glance at Nangongyu, and taking the jade tablet, sneeringly said, I accept the jade tablet, but as for the yuan, that's not necessary. I've said that the yuan young fruit is what I want. Just make it the medical fee. The transaction is now complete. We're even. Finished speaking, and without hesitation, she turned around to leave Ouyang Manor. Nangongyu looked at her confident back with his eyes shining brilliantly, then quickly moved his feet to follow her out. Left behind, Ouyang Zhixiong stood alone as he stared at the empty gate, his emotions fluctuating for quite a while before he then turned around, heading back towards his son's room. Hushi had arrived at the Ouyang Manor early in the morning, and now that the treatment was finished, going by the color of the sky, it was already late evening. She was worried about wet Nurse Chen waiting for her with the evening meal, her heart also somewhat anxious. The internal energy within her body fluctuated, stretching like a shadow as she prepared to use Qing Gong to quickly return home. Her figure had barely moved several steps when suddenly, before her eyes, she ran into a wall of flesh. Hushi moaned softly, feeling the tip of her nose ache, while a familiar scent that was clear and cold lingered. Chapter 82. Unworthy to associate with the man's deep voice sounded in her ear. Little thing, am I a bother to you? For you to go so far as to leave without even informing me. How can you destroy the bridge after crossing the river, one? Hushi clutched her aching nose, her watery eyes looking towards the man blocking her path. Then if I inform you now, will that do? Finished speaking, she waved her hand and without expression said, Nangongyu, goodbye. Nangongyu, due to this heartless little guy, gave a mixed angry and happy laugh. Then, grabbing her white wrist that had just waved at him, he pulled her to his chest, and with a faint laugh in his voice said, if you say goodbye just like that, then how can this king have any face? At this time, the two of them were standing very close together. Hushi nearly pressed up against Nangongyu's chest. They were also still in front of the Ouyang family's gate, so the people passing by in West Street were all suddenly watching them as they walked past. Those gazes contained astonishment, curiousness, puzzlement, but even more, contempt. Two men unexpectedly embracing in the middle of the street. This was simply an injury to public morals. They have no sense of shame. Hushi's cheeks blushed, and despite not caring about other people's gazes, she was now somewhat ashamed, desperately struggling to break free from his arm. The more she struggled, the tighter Nangongyu embraced her, ultimately ending with one of his arms around her slender waist, firmly locking her to his chest. You let go, Hushi said in a fluster. What do you want? Nangongyu wasn't the slightest bit concerned about passing people's gazes. Whilst their gazes became more vague, his actions became more intimate, just like she was swearing sovereignty to him. "Tell me, why was your attitude so cold towards me all of a sudden this morning?" Nangongyu lowered his head, gently whispering in her ear, "If you tell me the truth, I'll let you go." Hushi clenched her teeth tightly as she recalled Zhu Kei's arrogant words towards her yesterday, and thinking of the sharp warning, she couldn't help but sneer. "You're the high and mighty, your highness, Hell King, and I'm merely a concubine-born daughter abandoned by the Nalan family. How could I be cold towards you? However, I do not dare to seek a friendship with somebody of a higher social standing. I'm just being respectful and polite, that's all." Nangongyu's hands that were around her waist suddenly tightened, his cold eyes falling on her opening and closing red lips. He really wanted to seal closed this small mouth that spat out words that could make people angered to death. He is the dignified Hell King. For the purpose of winning her over, he had accompanied her to Ouyang Manor, not even hesitating to use his own spiritual power to help her with the treatment. But unexpectedly, what she gave him in exchange was a sentence of, "I do not dare to seek a friendship with somebody of a higher social standing." As Nangongyu's eyes became colder, Hushi couldn't help but tremble. She remembered that this man had helped her when she was pale and weak, and couldn't help but feel somewhat guilty. But just when she went to say something to make up with him, the sudden sound of crisp bells was heard by her ears. As she turned her head, she saw a luxurious carriage stop in front of them. Pulling the carriage was a fine snow-white horse, its white hair shiny and smooth without a trace of impurities, its eyes clear and bright. Sitting on the carriage was Nangongyu's trusted subordinate, Qinglong. At this moment he was slightly panting, his face looking eager. "Master, young Master Shi, please get on the carriage to continue chatting." His gaze nervously swept all around, his heart extremely glad that his master usually kept a low profile. So although he was famous and outstanding to the general public, only a few people were able to recognize his appearance. Otherwise, the rumor of Hell King is a homosexual, Hell King and a man were intimately embracing each other will spread, causing an uproar. At that time, not just Master's reputation would suffer damage. All the young ladies throughout Jinling infatuated with Master would be driven mad. 1. To abandon one's benefactor upon achieving one's goal. Chapter 83. Indeed, the taste is really good. When Qinglong thought of that horror scene, his whole body felt unwell, so he drove the carriage with the fastest possible speed from Hell King's other courtyard nearby to here. "Only, unruly master, if you don't want to shock the world, please, by all means, don't cause an uproar known to everyone." Nangongyu showed a sarcastic smile as he glanced at the nervous Qinglong, releasing a chilling aura. Hushi, however, coldly said, "No need. I can go back by myself. Then, we'll separate here." Finished speaking, she turned around to leave, not even managing 2 steps before she unexpectedly felt a strong force on her waist pull her body straight up into the air. Hushi had no time to cry out in surprise before she was stuffed into the carriage, the door blocked by Nangongyu. The carriage swayed as it moved forward, and after traveling several paces, it suddenly sped up, the speed almost reaching that of a car from her previous life. Hushi's expression was ugly as she glared at Nangongyu, the mighty Hell King. "How can you force a little girl?" Nangongyu leisurely smiled. "Which rules say this king can't force a little girl?" After saying that, he leaned forward slightly and slowly said, "Moreover, I only forced you." Hushi's heart jumped, and she turned her head to avoid his gaze. However, unaware of why, she was filled with an unidentifiable happiness. The corner of Nangongyu's mouth raised, and taking out several refreshments, he arranged them on a small table, then softly said, "You were busy all of today and haven't eaten yet, right?" Hushi stared blankly, the sweetly rich fragrance of spiritual energy assaulting her nose. Turning her head to look around, she discovered that the outward appearance of this carriage was nothing out of the ordinary, but that the interior decorations were extremely luxurious. The furnishings inside the carriage were all refined using spirit tools, so they carried faint spiritual power fluctuations. The brocade fluttering on the floor was made using 10,000-year-old ice silk, and the small, unremarkable-looking table was made using rare and very old dark sandalwood. The white tea set that Nangongyu had just arranged. Although she was unable to properly tell the quality and materials used, it gave off a refreshing feeling as it hovered over the table. With one look, she was able to tell that it wasn't just an ordinary product. Hushi clicked her tongue whilst examining everything and shook her head. Indeed, this is like that poem. Rotten food at a wealthy door, frozen bodies on the floor one. Just looking at the items here could make a person jealous, as any item in here was the same, its value far surpassing that of her small courtyard. Nangongyu had never heard this poem before, but right away, he understood the meaning of the poem, leisurely laughing. What, you dislike this king now? No, I just hate the rich. Hushi smiled, before grabbing a pastry and shoving it into her mouth. The sweet fragrance spread between her lips and tongue, and although it couldn't compare with her own cooking, 90% of the pastry's spiritual energy remained. This can be considered as her having eaten this world's best food. Hushi's eyes lit up as she exclaimed, "The taste is really good." Nangongyu's luminous eyes were glued to her mouth, her pearly white teeth hidden behind soft red lips, just like snow on a red plum flower. His heart that had been silent for many years suddenly began to throb, a burning desire within his body beginning to stir. Suddenly extending his arm, he gently captured Hushi's hand that was still holding half of the pastry, and pulling her towards him, he slightly lowered his head. The pastry that was still held in Hushi's hand entered his mouth, along with one of her fingers which he gently nibbled. Hushi's whole body stiffened, as if it was struck by lightning. "You..." Nangongyu swallowed the pastry, not completely understanding about what tasted good. However, he laughed devilishly indeed. The taste is really good. In one poem about the deep disparity between the rich and the poor. While the rich wine and dine, the poor die of cold by the roadside. Chapter 84. Yes, I'm a pervert. Hushi felt uncomfortable all over. Her lips parted halfway as they slightly trembled. Yet, she was unable to say a word for a long time. The fire in Nangongyu's eyes became more passionate, causing his body to move forward, and grabbing her wrist, he pulled her even closer. As he leant his body over hers, he kissed those slightly parted red lips. WTF? What is this man doing? Hushi suddenly came to her senses and struggled to break free with all her might. However, Nangongyu effortlessly pressed down on her nape, rendering her unable to escape. A burst of strong wind erupted from Nangongyu's palm, causing the small table that was originally standing between them to now be pushed away. There was now no longer any barrier between the two of them. Invisible needles appeared in Hushi's palm, and just when she was about to launch them, her hands were suddenly restrained behind her back, the invisible needles quietly falling to the floor. Nangongyu picked her up and placed her on his lap, then lowered his head and started kissing her again. This time it wasn't a light kiss, like a dragonfly gently skimming the water. Instead, it was like a stormy sea, the heat and aggression slowly trying to engulf her. Hushi felt as if she was melting, every cell in her body burning. Her mind was so muddled that she couldn't think clearly, and she didn't have the slightest ounce of power to strike back. Then, after a good while, when Hushi was close to suffocating, only then did Nangongyu release her. His usually clear and melodious voice now hoarse and low, full of passion. "It tastes really good and very sweet." Hushi all of a sudden sobered and raised her hand to slap Nangongyu. "You pervert, bastard, asshole." Hushi was so angry her whole body was trembling. Never before had a man been so daring towards her like this. This man had unexpectedly dared to disrespect her, snatching away her first kiss. He could just be damned to die 1,000 times, 10,000 times. However, Hushi was unaware that her voice wasn't cold and stern, like it usually was when she was disguised as a man. Instead, it was delicate and soft. If people heard it, it would sound like a spoiled child acting coquettishly. Nangongyu held back her hand that wanted to slap him, and confined her in his arms while laughing lightly. I am a pervert." Although he had never heard the word pervert before, it was very easy to understand its meaning, wasn't it? finished speaking, the smiling expression in his eyes intensified, and bowing his head, he lightly pecked the side of the girl's red and somewhat swollen lips. However, I'm only doing this with you. For a moment, Hushi felt bewildered. She was extremely angry, itching to slaughter this man. Yet, besides the anger consuming her, she could feel a warmth spreading from the bottom of her heart that she herself failed to understand. Hushi had never experienced such feelings before in the 19 years that she had lived. Furthermore, she had never been so flustered or weak. You shameless bastard. Let me go. Hushi struggled firmly, wanting to push Nangongyu away. But in regards to her resistance, how could Nangongyu care about it? Effortlessly confining her in his arms, he lowered his head. Then leaning close to her flushed earlobe, he whispered, I am shameless. But recently you obviously like that, isn't that right? At first, he had only wanted to scare this emotionless little girl without a conscience. Yet when her soft lips had touched his, he suddenly felt heat rise within his body like a wave, causing him to lose all reason and become unable to suppress his desires. He couldn't help but want to devour this girl, to mark her with his scent, making her completely his. Nangongyu had lived for 20 years and never experienced this kind of feeling before. Furthermore, he had never felt such an intense desire towards any girl in the past. From this moment on, he completely regarded Hushi as belonging to him. He would never allow others to covet her, nor would he allow her to escape. Chapter 85. I'll kiss you until you like it. Hushi felt agitated, causing her heart to pound, her face unyielding. Who likes it? Disgusting. As soon as she finished speaking, she raised her hand and wiped her kiss-swollen red lips. The next moment, she felt the air around her suddenly become dark and violent, as if a whirlpool was forming, preparing to swallow her. Nangongyu's face was overcast yet calm and collected as one hand hooked her nape, his frosty eyes staring at her. You said, disgusting? When Hushi looked at the expression on Nangongyu's face, she instantly wanted to retreat, her face turning pale. Of course she felt guilty. It was like she wasn't clear and had made him misunderstand. But he was the one who did the wrong thing first, breaching her heart so her attitude wouldn't be so cold towards him. However, just as Hushi moved to retreat, Nangongyu reacted first. He abruptly pressed her body closer to his, one hand holding her nape as the other hand tightly wrapped around her slender waist. Once she was firmly confined in his arms, he lowered his head, seizing her small mouth and kissing her once again. The kiss this time was more frantic than the first, as aggressive as if he was trying to devour her soul. Hushi was firmly captured in Nangongyu's arms. Her body felt like it had become liquid, so she had no other choice but be forced to accept his passionate kiss. When the kiss ended, she only had enough strength left to gasp for breath, her pink and tender cheeks turning red like a ripe apple. Nangongyu gently stroked her cheeks, feeling their satiny warmth, and with a husky voice lightly laughed, "Little thing. Your mouth says no, yet your heart says yes, but even then, you still dare to say you don't like it?" Hushi gnashed her teeth as she raised her head to glare at him. Without waiting for her to rage and curse, Nangongyu laughingly said, "If you still dare to say it's disgusting, I wouldn't mind kissing you until you like it." "Shier, you want to try it?" Hushi, who had been on the verge of rage, held it back, her anger creasing her long and shapely eyebrows, making her beautiful small face turn grim. Nangongyu couldn't help but laugh when he saw her angry kitten-like appearance, his expression full of affection and happiness as he looked at her. "Shi-er, how can you look so adorable? You're adorable. Your whole family is adorable." Hushi gnashed her teeth once again, and quickly retreating, she escaped from Nangongyu's arms, her left hand secretly raising the curtain as she considered jumping from the window. But as a result, Nangongyu's next words made her obediently sit back down. "You don't want to know how to use the yuanyang fruit?" Nangongyu spoke casually, but the listening Hushi was seething with anger, itching to beat his annoying laughing face into a pig head. "Good. Very good. You hold the information that I need, and a hero doesn't suffer from one loss, so I admit defeat this time. Life had its ups and downs. She didn't believe that after she was able to cultivate, that Nangongyu would still have ways to threaten her. At that time, she would let him know why the flowers were so red. Hushi took a deep breath, then another. It was only after taking that second deep breath was she able to push down the resentment in her heart, placing a fake smile upon her face. In that case, may I ask Hell King, Nangongyu, to tell me how to use the yuanyang fruit? The tips of Nangongyu's eyebrows and the corners of his eyes rose as he smiled. He thought that the girl before him was cunning yet adorable, especially due to the pain her wrist must in from when he had grabbed her before. Her appearance was of one wanting to resist rubbing it but being unable to, and that made him itch to take her into his arms again, firmly rubbing and pinching her. Nangongyu laughed, and only when he saw that Hushi was getting angry again did he stop, saying in a serious voice, "Yuanyang fruit will work more effectively if you use it directly, rather than refining it into a medicinal pill. The only condition is that your body needs to resist the yang attribute of the yuanyang fruit. Otherwise, your body will explode, but, unfortunately, it's the only way." Chapter 86. Do you believe me? The corners of Hushi's mouth puckered as she fiercely said, "So, what should I do to be able to resist the yuanyang fruit's yang nature?" Nangongyu coughed before slightly smiling. In order to neutralize the yang in the yuanyang fruit, you must use the coldest object, the yuanyang fruit's counterpart. This way, it will help guide the yuanyang fruit's heat straight to your dantian, but cooling it enough so that it won't be more than your body could bear. Hushi frowned. Then what's the coldest object? Nangongyu again smiled slightly. Take out the yuanyang fruit first. Hushi glanced at him suspiciously, but without pause, she still withdrew the jade box containing the two yuanyang fruit from her space. The one sitting in front of her was the Great Hell King. An insignificant fifth-rank yuanyang fruit was nothing in his eyes. Nangongyu saw that she had no hesitation when she brought out the yuanyang fruit, and the dazzling radiance in his eyes shone brightly. Taking the jade box, he gently opened the cover, and a blazing heat burst forth. But as if it was nothing, his slender fingers gently stretched, grabbing one of the yuanyang fruit. The next moment, the yuanyang fruit in his hand disappeared before Hushi's eyes. Nangongyu had just clearly deposited it into his storage space. Hushi blinked, momentarily not understanding what it was that Nangongyu was doing. Nangongyu's eyes deeply looked at Hushi, but instead of explaining to her, he gently reached out his hand to tuck her disordered hair behind ear, then slowly said, "I'll take this yuanyang fruit as a reward. In a month, I will bring you the coldest object. After that, you will be able to remove the seal on your dantian and become a cultivator." Hushi stared blankly, almost blurting out the question of why he was helping her to this extent. In regards to him taking a yuanyang fruit as a reward, she didn't mind, as it should be his. However, Nangongyu's burning gaze made her voice sluggish, so no matter how hard she tried, her voice wouldn't come out. At this moment, he lowered his head, his warm breathing fanning her slightly open red lips, his voice intimate, "She heir, do you believe me?" Hushi's body froze, as if by a spell, her mind like paste. Though even when she couldn't react, she still subconsciously nodded. That's right, she believed Nangongyu. She believed this stranger, this mysterious man, who has given her a lot of help. Despite there being no reason, she was convinced that whatever Nangongyu promised, he will certainly accomplish. The carriage soon arrived at a desolate area and stopped, not far away from her courtyard. Hushi gracefully jumped off the carriage, waved her hand towards Nangongyu, then turned around and hurriedly left. Although the night air was cold, it was unable to disperse the warmth on her face, her heart still pounding incessantly. Nangongyu lifted the curtain and watched as Hushi's back traveled further away, a complicated light flashing in his eyes. Outside the carriage, Qinglong's brows wrinkled. As he stared in the direction Hushi left, a touch of anxiousness swept past his eyes. In 1 month's time, wasn't that Master's once-a-year seclusion? Period? Master, what does he think he's doing? As a thought came to his mind, Qinglong's complexion became extremely unsightly, his eyes revealing a slight killing intent. He would not let anybody off who endangered the safety of his master. 1. Closed-door training, also called closed-door meditation or closed-door cultivation. Chapter 87. Nangong Yu's mind after returning. In the meeting hall of the Hell King's brightly lit manor, several subordinates were reporting a lack of progress to their master. Those are the current circumstances regarding Metal Chelan, by who has been reporting for half a day already, yet once he raised his head, he saw his normally cold-hearted master looking somewhat absent-minded. Although the expression on his face was still indifferent, those beautiful star-like eyes were gleaming brightly, as if he was thinking of something interesting, by whose chin almost hit the floor. They all knew that although their master was only 20 years old, his face was usually set in a demonic sneer, his deep eyes similar to a calm ancient well, as if in this world, simply no one or anything was able to arouse his interest. Usually during the daily report, Master would only need to listen to the beginning, straight away knowing the rest without have to hear it. So without having to wait for them to finish their report, he's able to give them accurate instructions on what to do. But today, Master was actually absent-minded. By who had finished his report and Master's orders still couldn't be heard. This was simply too unimaginable. What was Master thinking of? By who was uncertain, and he couldn't help but secretly cast a glance towards Master's slightly pursed lips. That spot of light peach color on his lower lip, it seemed to look like bite marks. By whose heart palpitated. Master is on the nascent soul stage. With his spiritual power, he would be able to heal this minor cut. But now Master had kept the wound, in the end. Who caused it? He vaguely cast a glance towards Qing Long, who was standing behind Master like an invisible person, asking with his eyes, "What happened with Master today?" Qing Long's expression was cold, a trace of confusion and anger visible in his eyes. Just when Bai Hu was becoming extremely confused, Nangong Yu finally came back from his thoughts to see Bai Hu's confused expression and darting gaze, so he couldn't help but faintly say, "I already understand the circumstances regarding Metal Chelan. Since the situation is now unusual, you can command them to train for the time being. If something happens, then let Wu Xian handle it." "Yes, Master." Bai Hu quickly focused his thoughts and respectfully said, "This subordinate will notify Wu Xian. If there is nothing else, you can all withdraw." Nangong Yu said with a wave of his hand. They quickly answered, and under Bai Hu's lead, they quietly withdrew from the hall, Qing Long following as he was also ordered to leave. Nangong Yu sat alone in the large hall, and as his hand reached out to lightly touch the small cut on his lower lip, the corner of his mouth lifted into a light smile. What is that little thing doing now? Were there any thoughts of him? Before Nangong Yu's eyes, an elegant and beautiful image slowly appeared. Obviously it's a teenage girl, yet even though she was disguised as a man, there wasn't the slightest flaw in her disguise. Even Ouyang Zhixiang, one of the top experts in the country, was unable to see through her disguise. If he hadn't recognized that pair of purple eyes earlier, perhaps even he would be unable to imagine that the elegant as a pearl Shiyu, the genius Dr. Shi, and Nalan family's abandoned and ugly concubine-born daughter, Nalan Hushi, were unexpectedly the same person. In his mind, the actions of the two people in the carriage flashed past. The little girl's dainty body was soft and emitted a nice fragrance, her lips more delicate than a flower petal. These scenes replayed over and over in his mind, causing him to feel agitated and his body to feel burning hot. Never before had a person so affected his emotions like this little girl did, making him long to possess her, eager to be able to see her every frown and smile. Chapter 88. Two faced it was fate. From the first moment he saw the radiance in her eyes when she opened them in Gluttonous House. His heart was drawn, unable to break free. But so what if he couldn't break free? If he, Nangong Yu, wanted something, there wasn't anything he couldn't obtain. Just at this moment, the guard's voice from outside the door lightly reported, "Master, Zhu Ke requests to see you." Soon after, a beautiful woman dressed in red walked into the hall, then kneeled towards Nangong Yu in greeting. Her movements were as elegant as moving clouds. Without losing any of her outstanding beauty, when she kneeled, Her chest and abdomen were still slightly upright, completely exposing the pretty curves of her body. Nangongyu said, "Rise. The girl that I ordered you to examine, how was the condition of her injury?" Zhu Ke slowly stood up, her face frosty and eyebrows slightly wrinkled. Contempt flashed in her eyes but quickly vanished without a trace, while on the surface she was still respectful as she replied, answering Master, "Miss Nayland was only superficially wounded. It's not serious." After Zhu Ke had returned, she discovered that the person who lived in that remote courtyard, where no spiritual energy existed, was unexpectedly Nayland Manor's concubine-born third Mississippi. Moreover, she was the trash who had long been abandoned by Nayland Manor. Not mentioning an insignificant place like Nayland Manor, but just basing it off her physical condition as trash and her low-born birth, the people in Hell King's Manor simply wouldn't even bother to pay attention to her. Yet she still dared to seduce Master. She could be damned. Nangongyu nodded. He had used his spiritual power to examine her, so of course he knew her body didn't have any problems. Only, thinking of those criss-crossing scars, a trace of chilliness swept across his heart. The scars on her body will be able to heal? Zhu Ke dropped her gaze to hide her mood, while her hands hanging at her side were tightly clenched. Using a mocking tone to refer to herself, she said, "Master, this subordinate is a 5th-rank doctor. Yet it's still impossible for me to treat insignificant scars. How can I even have the qualifications to serve Master?" After hearing no response, she secretly lifted her eyes to see a smile that wasn't a smile on Nangongyu's face. She couldn't help but bite her lip, then, appearing like it was accidental, said, "Because Miss Nayland's injury was only caused by an ordinary object, it didn't injure the texture of her skin. So, this subordinate originally planned to give her a bottle of 2nd-rank pure jade dew pills as it would be enough. Although this medicine's effect is ordinary, so the time to completely recover would be longer, it would benefit an ordinary person like Miss Nayland due to the nature of the medicine, which is that of alleviating pain. But, who knows, who knows?" Zhu Ke once again glanced at Nangongyu, and seeing him restrain his smile, with his brows slightly wrinkled, she happily continued, "Miss Nayland probably knew that this subordinate is a 5th-rank doctor, so she wanted a portion of every type of medicinal pill. But those medicinal pills are all for 3rd rank and higher. For an ordinary person to take those medicines will cause their body to explode. This subordinate painstakingly tried to persuade her for a long time, yet Miss Nayland not only didn't listen, she said, she is a person whom Master regards as important, while this subordinate was only a slave. What could this subordinate do, other than do what she was told? This subordinate is really incapable. I could only give her a portion of every type of medicinal pill." Nangongyu slightly smirked, neither reprimanding or appeasing her, only asking one thing, "Oh, is that so?" Zhu Ke was frightened by her master's meaningful gaze, as if he could see into her heart. Having no other choice but to restrain her guilt and fear, she nodded. Nangongyu suddenly spoke with a deep voice, "But I remember ordering you to bring the 4th-rank jade muscle pill. Zhu Ke, are you outwardly agreeing to what I say, yet secretly opposing my orders? This subordinate doesn't dare." Zhu Ke was so frightened. Her whole body was trembling as she fell to her knees. Chapter 89, by whose gossip Zhu Ke was so frightened that her whole body trembled, her knees thumping to the floor as she fell to kneel. This subordinate examined Miss Nayland's body and found that she is just an ordinary person without a cultivation base. The jade muscle pill is a 4th-rank medicinal pill. It's really harmful to Miss Nayland. So, without permission, I decided to exchange it with pure jade dew pills which only have a mild effect. Yet afterwards, Miss Nayland demanded that this subordinate also give her the jade muscle pill, begging Master to clearly distinguish this. Nangongyu lightly said, "I just casually asked. You don't have to be so nervous." Suddenly, he pointed to her face and asked, "What happened to your face?" Zhu Ke touched her left cheek, ashamed, resentment flashing in her eyes. She, Zhu Ke, posed as a beauty. No one in Hell King's Manor could be compared to her. Added with her excellent medical skills and decent cultivation base, Master has always thought highly of her. Apart from herself, There has been no other woman who could get close to Master. But now, that immature, ugly girl had dared to injure her cherished face, causing the hatred in her heart to rise in turbulent waves. At this time, sloping scratches extended from her temple to her cheek on the left half of her face, and although the scar wasn't long, it was a faint grayish color. As long as a person with discerning eyes looked at her face, they could easily spot it. The appearance Zhu Ke had cherished the most was now like heart-piercing torment to her. Yesterday, she didn't immediately treat the wound, so now it's become like this. Zhu Ke lowered her eyes, her face showing a humiliated and flustered expression, and with a low voice said, "Miss Nayland," when she demanded more than 10 types of precious medicinal pills from this subordinate. This subordinate originally refused, but who knew that she would suddenly throw a strange silver needle? At the time, this subordinate was not aware, however. "Master, please don't blame Miss Nayland. She is also worried the scars on her body will remain." So momentarily anxious, this subordinate was too careless. This subordinate is obviously a cultivator of gold core stage, yet still managed to be injured by an ordinary person's hands. Zhu Ke lifted her head, concealed the radiance in her eyes, and with an enduring and humiliated expression, she looked at Nan Gongyu. She just couldn't believe that Master would be seduced by such a greedy and vain woman. But who knew what Nan Gongyu was thinking as he just casually smiled, his pitch-black eyes like calm ancient wells, not revealing a trace of his emotions. An instant's stick of time later, Zhu Ke left the hall, her face livid. She touched the wound that was still faintly painful and itchy, her heart full of hatred. She had exposed all of Nayland Hushi's wicked conduct to Master. Yet, unexpectedly, Master didn't say anything, only waving his hand for her to withdraw. Could it be that Master truly liked that smelly girl? Zhu Ke gnashed her teeth while thinking, and Bai Hu, coming from the opposite direction, saw her ashen complexion and the scar on her face. He couldn't help but be surprised as he asked, "What happened to you? How come your complexion is so unsightly? Did Master reprimand you? Furthermore, why does a scar still remain on your face? Aren't you a grand 5th-rank doctor? Such a little wound, yet you still can't treat it?" Zhu Ke's complexion immediately became gloomier, coldly saying, "You don't need to be so meddlesome. Manage yourself instead." Bai Hu shrugged. It isn't good to provoke a woman over her appearance. Rather, recalling what he had just seen in the hall, he couldn't help but gossip with Zhu Ke. "Hey, Zhu Ke, you haven't found Master abnormal today, have you? He went out early this morning, bringing Qing Long with him, and not returning until the sun set in the west." The expression on his face when he returned was as fresh as a spring breeze. "When I reported to Master, it was the first time I'd ever seen him absent-minded." Zhu Ke's heart grew cold. She couldn't help but hesitate as she asked, "Do you know who Master met today?" Chapter 90. Zhu Ke's ruined appearance. By whose mouth twitched. The whereabouts of Master isn't something we subordinates can guess about as we wish. However, to gossip once in a while is still possible. His eyes brightened and he couldn't help but say, "Although, did you see that on Master's mouth there was a small cut?" After Zhu Ke heard this, an image suddenly appeared before her eyes showing that obvious cut on Master's lower lip. Tightly clenching her hands, her fingernails almost embedded themselves in her palms. Bai Hu was full of interest as he lowered his voice, excitedly continuing to gossip. "In my opinion, that cut is absolutely caused by being bitten. Master certainly didn't bite himself, and with Master's strength now, if it's not that he voluntarily let them, then no one would be able to. He, you understand what I mean, right? I feel that the Master of these days is so unusual. This must be the sprouting of a spring heart. In other words, Master has reached that age after all." "Shut up. Master's affairs aren't for a slave like you to recklessly start a rumor about." Zhu Ke suddenly shouted, shocking Bai Hu so much he jumped. Bai Hu noticed that her beautiful and cold appearance had completely become distorted, her body trembling, her eyes reflecting her rage. Master has such a heavenly appearance. How can common folk match up to him? If you dare babble nonsense again, don't blame me for being impolite to you. Finished speaking, she furiously turned away. Leaving Baihu standing alone with a face full of bewilderment, he blankly stared after her for half a day before saying in confusion, "What happened? Wasn't this only a joke? Even Master doesn't mind. But why was Zhu Kei so unreasonable, like her tail was being stepped on?" Zhu Kei angrily returned to her room, shutting the door with a bang. The rage in her heart couldn't be calmed, so she grabbed a porcelain bottle beside the door and fiercely threw it. In this world, no one is worthy enough for such a stunning master, especially that trash Nailin Hushi. Someone like her isn't even good enough to carry Master's shoes. Zhu Kei's eyes abruptly became very fierce. If she really intended to seduce Master and block Master's road, then she would absolutely not allow that slut to live. One by one, the sounds of shattering porcelain echoed in the room, before finally, it helped calm Zhu Kei down. Sitting down in front of her dressing table, she withdrew 2 jade muscle pills that she had refined herself. One she used orally, and the other was dissolved into a liquid, which she then gently applied on her face. She only needed a quarter of an hour and her face would be restored to its original smooth and beautiful complexion. Zhu Kei sat anxiously in front of the glass mirror, looking at her own cold and elegant facial features. Time passed, minute by minute, her eyes staring at the scar on her face so long she was nearly getting double vision. However, a quarter of an hour passed, half an hour passed, an hour passed, yet the scar on her face didn't have the slightest sign of recovery. Moreover, it was originally just a faint grayish color, but now it had turned a thick gray-black color. And the most frightening part is that before it was only slightly itchy, now it had become painful and severely itchy. In the mirror, that thin scar had spread in the blink of an eye. Although there was no decay, it was as if it had been rubbed, the skin around the scar appearing bumpy and uneven with deep wrinkles. In such a short time, that originally thin and small scar had suddenly become extremely obvious, as if a small centipede had run across Zhu Kei's soft and white face, leaving a very horrible and disgusting mark. My face. My face. Zhu Kei's eyes widened as she stared at the gray-black scar on her reflection in the mirror. Her face twisted and frightening. She issued a miserable scream. "You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.